Chapter 2070. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The Sword Elders of the Divine World gather. There's always someone who likes to show off. Once he achieves something, he'll wave his flag and gain attention. Usually, those who are unknown are the easiest to ignore. This was what Qin Hao had said at Beidou Mountain. There was no absolute conclusion about who was strong or weak. Being strong at one time might not always be strong. Perhaps someone would surpass him later. This meant that Wu's talent was no weaker than Nangong Miao's. At that time, Nangong Miao didn't think much of it. Now that he thought about it, it was ironic. Today, he had completely lost. Not only did he lose the sword in his hand, but he also lost the Tao in his heart. At that time, he had boasted that he could compete with Lu Qiu and Long Miao. In the end, the sword competition shattered his fantasy. How many of the sword cultivators here today could defeat Nangong Miao? He couldn't defeat Loi's sword. The beautiful woman and Li Guangxing were all stronger than him. Even the Laming clan's successor of the Western Sword Field, Shangguan Xinghe, Yuluo Divine Grandson, and Beidiyi's cousin would have the qualifications to suppress Nangong Miao once they completed their heavenly wheels and stepped into the divine path. No matter how proud he was, his talent couldn't be compared to others. Congratulations! The immortal divine god, secluded spring sect master, supreme god soaring cloud, spiritual master Xuani, and many other powerful figures in front of the divine palace congratulated Fairy Qing Rong and Daisakong. These two had been chosen by the academy to become disciples. Ha ha ha, Wuk and Chu San aren't sword cultivators of the western capital. They're just guests in my residence, Daisakong said modestly. Although he said this, he was very happy inside. His gaze shifted towards Dean Nan. At this time, Dean Nan's face was gloomy. He didn't say a word in the crowd, as if he had aged a lot. Dean, Nangong Miao is a seedling worth nurturing. But he's too arrogant and thinks too highly of himself, to the point that he doesn't consider the consequences of his words and actions. Let this sword competition be a lesson for him, Daisakong Nan said as he patted Dean Nan's shoulder. Sigh, Nangong Miao Miao. D has indeed overstepped his boundaries and sunk into his ego, believing himself to be unparalleled in the world. In fact, the first person he lost to was himself. Headmaster Nan sighed. Nangong Xiong had been born with a good background, and he had always trained by his side. This made Headmaster Nan feel as though Nangong Xiong was a blessed child of the heavens, who should shoulder the shoulders of the rising pillars of the seamless realm and view himself as Lu Qiu. Little did he know that he was different from Lu Qiu. There was no need for him to set harsh requirements. Instead, those lofty ideals and illusory goals made him gradually lose himself. The big shots of the divine realm were discussing things here. Everyone sympathized with Dean Nan's feelings, but they could also understand. At this moment, the Master God's will, who had transformed into a ball of light, silently looked at a certain spot in the void and said, "Since you're here, let the juniors of the God realm see me." As the Divine Master's voice fell, a powerful and dazzling divine splendor of the great path shone in that direction. A celestial figure full of majesty appeared. As it gradually solidified, the radiance it emitted revealed a myriad of charm. It was dignified, holy, and unstoppable. It was the second strongest person in the infinite divine realm, the Eastern Victory Immortal, whose status was comparable to the purple flower heavenly centipede. Immortal! Daisakong and the others looked up. Greetings, Senior Immortal. Countless swordsmen bowed. Master, Qing Rong called out softly with a smile on her face. The Eastern Victory Immortal nodded slightly at the crowd. His noble figure stood beside the ball of light that the Divine Lord of Infinity had transformed into. There was only one person reflected in his eyes, Loi of the Eastern Deity Heaven. "You speak," the Eastern Victory Immortal said. The Divine Lord of Infinity's hazy face smiled. He spoke loudly to the thousands of swordsmen of the divine realm. Today, the might of the Great Path has descended twice at the Academy Sword Conference. I believe that you are all very curious about Loi. The crowd looked at each other. They were indeed filled with curiosity. Because the might of the Great Path had been poured into Luo Xianzi, how could she use the power of the Great Path? She is the daughter of Dongxing and me, the Divine Lord of Infinity said. Boom. His words caused a huge commotion. The thousands of swordsmen were all deeply shocked. That's right. Loi is indeed the daughter of Infinity and me. The Eastern Victory Immortal admitted it personally, completely dispelling the suspicions in the crowd's hearts. No wonder her swordsmanship is so strong. No one can match Luo Xianzi's sword. She also has the divine decree of frost. Bright moon life spirit, celestial wheel. Every characteristic has the shadow of the Divine Lord and the Celestial Lord. This can explain why she can summon the might of the Great Path. Luo Xianzi is the blood of the Divine Lord. The shock in their hearts could not be quelled. The thousands of swordsmen knew that for all these years, the Divine Lord had no children. It was also because of this that compared to the other two sword realms, the infinite realm always lacked something. But now, the Divine Lord had a child. She was alive and standing in front of everyone, sparring with thousands of swordsmen. Her talent and strength were so strong that she almost swept the entire Eastern sword field. She was peerless. Thinking of this, countless swordsmen felt relieved. Since she was the beloved daughter of the Divine Lord and the Celestial Lord, she should have a stunning performance. Otherwise, how could she be worthy of her noble birth? Losing to Loi was not shameful. It was natural that they could not even withstand a single strike from her. But all of a sudden, a sense of shock rose in the hearts of many people, and they subconsciously looked at Qin Hao in the Western Capital's group. Thousands of swordsmen could not withstand a single strike from Loi. Everyone felt that it was natural. Even the transcendental disciples of the Academy paled in comparison to Loi. But what about the silver-haired youth from the Western Capital? This fellow had fought the daughter of a divine master to a standstill. He had crossed the frost glory divine intent and remained undefeated. The more they thought about it, the more terrified they felt. One could imagine how strong Qin Hao was. Moreover, on the high platform in the sky, Qin Hao seemed to be holding back. After all, he had not used the celestial wheel. If he had used the celestial wheel just now, what would have happened? The more they thought about it, the more terrified they became. No one dared to continue thinking about it. At this moment, Loi was also very excited. Her eyes were slightly red. She had waited for this day for too long. It had been thousands of years. She had always wanted to know about her birth and her family. Her master had told her that she would understand when she entered the academy. During this period, Loi had barged into the academy more than once. Every time, she would be stopped by the realm aura. Until one day, she broke through the realm aura's shackles and stood in the academy. She was only one step away from meeting the Divine Lord of Avicii. But it was enough for her to understand something. Her birth was related to the sword god of Avicii. Now, she had the answer she wanted to know even in her dreams. She was the daughter of the sword god of Avicii, the princess of the realm of gods. Not only that, the master who had taught her since she was a child was her mother. That girl is crying. Wuk nudged Qin Hao. Loi could cry? What does it have to do with me? Qin Hao's expression was cold. Then, he smiled at Xiao Han and held his wife's hand. In this sword conference, the elders and I saw the future of the god realm. If we want to revive the sword Tao of Avicii, we have a long way to go. It is not a matter of one master, one person, and one sword. Whether the Avicii realm can continue to stand tall in the wilderness and become the god realm of the sword Tao depends on your performance. I hope that after today's sword conference, more geniuses will emerge from the various planes, said the Divine Lord of Avicii. We will not disappoint the Divine Lord. We will work hard to cultivate the sword, everyone shouted. Just don't disappoint yourselves. Apart from that, the ancient void mirage will be opened to the public. Those who want to enter can go directly to the western capital after leaving the academy. Daisakong will send people to arrange it. This can be considered a reward for you, ordered the divine lord of Avicii. In an instant, the hearts of thousands of sword cultivators trembled. It was said that the ancient void mirage was one of the sources of power that supported the Avicii realm. It was controlled by the divine lord himself. Ordinary people could not enter. Only the big shots of the god realm and the god ancestors of the various planes had the qualifications to enter. Moreover, those who came out of the ancient void mirage in the past were all much stronger and had powerful ancient divine artifacts. To the western capital, the Yuluo divine clans group bowed respectfully to the divine lord, then turned around and left the academy. The Shangguan clan, the Laming clan, and many other powerful clans did the same. The beautiful woman who lost to Li Guangxing was the first to leave. With the opening of the ancient void mirage, none of the sword cultivators of the Avicii realm wanted to miss this opportunity. It might change their lives. If their luck was good enough, they might be able to find a supreme opportunity. Waves of people flowed out of the academy. Using his will, he could sense that they were all heading towards the western capital. The sword god of Avicii naturally didn't need to care. He spoke to the Dao Plaza. Everyone disperse. There are some dangers in the ancient void mirage. I hope that you all know your limits. The few of you follow me. The divine lords will swept past Qin Hao, Wuk, Li Guangxing, Loi, and the others. A blurry ball of light soared into the air, flying towards the depths of the academy. The sword god of Avicii has summoned you. The doyens are all waiting. Don't be rude. Daisakong shouted to Qin Hao and the others. After that, he turned to the Dongxing Immortal Sovereign, North Star Celestial Sovereign, Headmaster Nan, and the other major powers. Supreme Pavilion, let's go together. Supreme Pavilion was the place where the Divine Lord of Avicii cultivated. Please. Everyone modestly declined. They turned into beams of light and followed the Divine Lord. Chu San, Wuk, you guys go with Li Guangxing and Luo Xianzi. I'll go back to the western capital first. Divine Lord Xin, you guys go back with me first, Zhang De said. The ancient void mirage had opened. He had already received Daisakong's message. He needed to lead the guards there to maintain order. Okay. Xin nodded. He turned to Qin Hao and said, Go quickly. Okay, Qin Hao replied. He turned into beams of light with Wuk and the others and disappeared into the void behind the sacred hall. Brother Chu San, wait for me. Si Huan pretended to go as well. Young Master Si, don't cause trouble. Zhang De grabbed Si Huan's arm. How am I causing trouble? My father, my grandfather, and the Divine Lord are all here. I'm not an outsider. Si Huan objected. Wasn't the academy his second home? Zhang De ignored him and directly dragged him out, returning to the western capital. Supreme Pavilion. They were seated in the deepest part of the academy, on top of a mountain. The surrounding area was filled with birds and flowers. The endless world was different from Rikujinji and the true dragon world. Those were countries with divine authority, but this was a country with orthodoxy. Even though he was a divine lord, the sword god of Avicii didn't build any luxurious palaces. Everything he did seemed very casual and natural. At this moment, Qin Hao and the others followed the major powers of the deity world to the Supreme Pavilion. After entering, they were stunned by the atmosphere before them. The Dongxing Immortal Sovereign, North Star Celestial, Daisakong, Headmaster Nan. Not only were the major powers of the deity realm and the unaging Divine Lord present, there were also 6 incomparably powerful figures present. Each of them exuded an incomparably ancient aura. Among them, Qin Hao had seen sword god severing love before. You've all come. An extremely tall and majestic old man with white hair and beard spoke to the major powers of the deity realm. This person was extremely tall, taller than Qin Hao by a head. His gaze seemed calm, but as long as one looked into his eyes, one would feel as though they were being pierced by two rays of sword light. Gu Zun, North Star Celestial, and the others bowed slightly. The leader of the 6 founding elders, Gu Zun, had the highest cultivation in the endless world. He had 2 more marks than the divine Lord of Ichi. Back then, the 7 of them met and became sworn brothers. Gu Zun was the elder brother of sword god of Ichi. His status in the deity realm was extremely high. Greetings, founding elders and seniors. Qin Hao and the others hurriedly bowed. Little fellows, you fought pretty well. We all saw it very carefully, especially you. Ha ha ha. An old blind man with a black cloth over his eyes and a face full of wrinkles pointed at Qin Hao and laughed heartily. Based on his actions, those who didn't know better would think that this old man wasn't blind. I used all my skills and fought very hard. My performance was really not worth mentioning. Qin Hao leaned slightly and lowered his posture as he spoke respectfully to the old man. Through the power of the origin realm, he could sense that this old blind senior's sword intent was terrifyingly powerful. It was even stronger than the founding elder with the highest body. Only in front of the Tao of Divine Lord of Ichi did it seem slightly suppressed. This was a heavenly wheel expert whose strength was infinitely close to the Divine Lord. This old blind man gave Qin Hao his first impression. Chapter 2071. Elders were gathered in the Supreme Tower, each of them shockingly powerful. They were the pillars of the seamless world, and Qin Hao could not fight against any one of them. He remembered that when he had just entered the divine realm, a strand of the great Sekongs will had pressured him, and it was enough to make it difficult for Qin Hao to move an inch. Now, Senior Sekong's strength was at the bottom of the hierarchy among the magnates, and he was only slightly stronger than the immortal divine Venerable and the others. How could he not be shocked? If your performance is not worth mentioning, then the tens of thousands of seamless sword cultivators today are nothing. If they heard this, they would be ashamed. Blind Sword Sovereign smiled. Yes, where do you place us? Loi was dissatisfied. Qin Hao had forced her to use her full strength without even releasing his heavenly wheel. If this was not worth mentioning, then what was her performance? This silver-haired guy was bullying her. Kid, being too humble is hypocritical, the stooped grass sword sovereign said. Cough, cough. Senior is right. Qin Hao was slightly embarrassed. He couldn't praise himself, right? Wouldn't that make him seem like a hypocrite like Nangong Miao? Today is the first time the Academy has opened the sword conference to the public. The performances of the Eastern and Western sword fields are remarkable, shocking us old fellows who live in seclusion. Gu Jianzuan was gratified. Not only was Qin Hao outstanding, but the other 3 geniuses who were selected to enter the Academy also had their own unique areas. Wu's sword intent was extremely high, Li Guangxing was calm and experienced, and Loi was even more so. She had the bloodline of a divine master, and she fully displayed her sharpness. So, the divine realm should hold more sword conferences like this. This will encourage sword cultivators to work hard. A white-clothed figure stepped into the Supreme Tower. His aura was otherworldly, shocking everyone. Divine Master. Immortal Divine Deity and the others bowed slightly. Young Master. Daisakong hurriedly stood beside Sword God of Ichi. His honest appearance made him look like a servant serving his master. It was hard to associate him with the king of the West Capital. Junior greets the Divine Master. Wu and the others hurriedly saluted. Qin Hao looked over. God Lord of Ichi's appearance was that of an extremely handsome middle-aged man. From his facial features, it wasn't hard to imagine how handsome and elegant he had been in his youth. But his aura wasn't as refined as that of his senior apprentice brother Zine. He exuded an unparalleled sharpness, as if nothing in the universe could stop him. Senior seamless. Qin Hao cupped his hands as his emotions surged. This was the strongest divine Tao he had encountered since leaving the divine wilderness. He was even stronger than the god of the East. To be able to fight evenly with my daughter, boy, you're not simple. Divine Lord Avicii pointed at Qin Hao and smiled. Next, his gaze shifted to the Eastern Victory Immortal Sovereign. The two of them looked at each other and nodded slightly. They still maintained a distance from each other and didn't act intimately as everyone had imagined. They felt as though they were just ordinary friends, or even slightly more polite. Qin Hao looked at the Divine Master and the Immortal Sovereign. He felt strange. This shouldn't be the case. The Immortal Sovereign and I are very good friends. Divine Lord Avicii seemed to have seen through Qin Hao's doubts. Friends! Qin Hao was stunned. Everyone was also stunned. Was that all? Young Master, what's going on? Daisakong asked with concern. Divine Lord Avicii took a deep breath and glanced at Loi. He said slowly, back then, I took my own blood essence and a wisp of the Immortal Sovereign's soul essence. I infused it with the power of the great world to mold it into an embryo spirit. It was sealed in the Eastern deity's divine ice and nurtured for thousands of years. That was how Loi was born. Loi had his blood flowing in her veins. She also had the soul power of the Immortal Sovereign. She was indeed their child. But Divine Lord Avicii and the Eastern Victory Immortal Sovereign were not husband and wife. As he said, they were just friends. I see. Everyone suddenly understood. They had thought that the Divine Lord and the Immortal Sovereign had become Tao companions in private. They had been wondering why the Divine Lord and the Immortal Sovereign had become Tao companions without a public ceremony. They didn't expect that it was just an ordinary relationship. Young Master, why is that? Daisakong asked anxiously. He glanced at the Immortal Sovereign. Young Master was the Lord of a realm and the strongest sword god. The Immortal Sovereign was a peerless beauty. Both of them had immortal-grade heavenly wheels. When they stood together, they looked like a match made in heaven. Unfortunately, they weren't. Sikong, you don't have to worry about it. It's actually quite good for them to be like this. Sword Lord Gu said and looked at everyone. As everyone knows, the foundation of our seamless realm is weak. Whether it is the quantity or quality of our sword cultivators, we are inferior to Rikujinji and True Dragon Sword Realm. Under God Lu and Dragon Lord, we have Lu Qiu, Long Miao, and the other princes and princesses with powerful bloodlines. In the long run, the gap between the peak bloodlines of the three realms will grow bigger and bigger. In the end, it will reach an extreme level of prosperity and decline. In order to chase the footsteps of the two sword realms, Divine Lord Avicii and the Immortal Sovereign made this decision. When Sword Lord Gu said this, he looked meaningfully at Loi and said, Child, you were born to compete with Lu Qiu and Long Miao. The burden you bear is extremely heavy. This was the meaning of Loi's birth. Her existence was to compete with the successors of Rikujinji and True Dragon Clan. Otherwise, Sword Lord Avicii couldn't find a talent who could match her. Like Nangong Miao? Was he worthy? However, plans couldn't keep up with changes. Originally, Sword Lord Avicii and the Immortal Sovereign had planned for thousands of years to create the best bloodline. In the end, after a sword competition, an extraordinary monster Qin Hao who could match Loi appeared. Other than that, there was also Wuk and Li Guangxing. Both of them had exceeded the expectations of God Master Avicii and the elders. With this group of fresh blood joining them, they would have a much higher chance of fighting against the world of the gods and the true dragon race in the future. At the very least, they would not be completely defeated and could still put up a fight. Am I just the meaning of my existence? Loi let out a bitter laugh. In the hands of Sword Lord Avicii and the Immortal Sovereign, was she a puppet or a tool? No, heir, you have the proof of my union with Sword Lord Avicii. You are our real flesh and blood. Don't think about other things. Dongxing, immortal sovereign, held Loi's hand. Although she wasn't sword god Avicii's wife, Loi was their child. For thousands of years, every day and night, she had been waiting for the baby spirit in the ice. The process was more difficult than 10 months of pregnancy in the mortal world. Senior Avicii, why are you competing with God Lu and Dragon Lord? Qin Hao interrupted. He could understand the original intention of Sword God Avicii and Dongxing, immortal sovereign. Creating a god. Back in the Divine Wilderness continent, the Divine Palace wanted to create a god. Unfortunately, it didn't succeed for many generations. Zhan Wu had silently protected him for 3 generations in order to urge him to become a god. Even the evil spirits in the Divine Wilderness wanted to become a god. But Qin Hao couldn't understand one thing. Why did Sword God Avicii view God Lu and Dragon Lord as opponents? Could it be that there was an irreconcilable grudge between the 3 of them? Must it be passed on to future generations? According to legend, at the beginning of the primordial world, during the era of the ancient gods, countless formidable god-kings that could destroy the heavens and the earth appeared. They could easily annihilate numerous divine worlds with a single move of theirs, causing countless planes to vanish. Amongst them was a sword god-king that possessed innate sword energy. Divine Lord Avicii didn't explain Qin Hao's question. Instead, he talked about the age of ancient gods. That was an extremely chaotic and bloody period. Because at the beginning of their birth, no one had Tao. Naturally, there was no compassion, benevolence, kindness, or the human heart. They only had tyrannical strength. As long as they wanted something, they would use force to seize it. When the divine kings fought, the great Tao star universe was destroyed. The Sword God King was one of the ancient divine kings who fell. Divine Lord Avicii said. Everyone was horrified. Although they hadn't experienced the age of ancient gods, they could imagine the horror of the battle between the god kings. That kind of destruction could easily make countless god worlds and planes disappear. Billions of lives were lost. What does this have to do with the 3 great sword realms? Qin Hao didn't understand. Of course it does. Sword God of Avicii looked at Qin Hao solemnly and said, Sword God King has fallen. His divine soul was dispelled by an extremely powerful divine king using the Dharma, and his divine body was shattered into pieces. However, a small part of his will of Tao was left behind, which escaped his opponent's perception and drifted away in the untainted land. Could it be? Wuk was shocked. Yes, the 3 great sword worlds are the areas enveloped by the Sword God King's Tao insight. Every single piece of land, every single river, and even every single speck of dust here contains the tendons, flesh, and blood of the Sword God King, and everything about him when he was alive. Avicii was extremely solemn. In fact, the reason why Wujian was able to reach his current level of cultivation was because he happened to obtain a broken bone of a divine king by chance. The powerful sword intent of the bone cleansed his body, causing his celestial wheel to mutate and his sword intent to become even stronger. When his sword will radiated, the dust was infected and gave birth to the spirit of heavenly Tao. It evolved into continents and finally formed the sword world. Not only him, Avicii guessed that God Lu and Dragon Master must have also obtained something left behind by Sword God King. That was why they could support a world. In fact, the 3 great sword realms were originally one. That was Sword God King himself. If they wanted to reappear at the peak of the ancient sword Tao, the 3 great sword realms must merge. This was the goal of Sword God Avicii and immortal Venerable Dongxing to create a god. They needed a qualified person to inherit everything of Sword God King. We can't imagine how strong Sword God King was when he was at his peak. But if the God King who killed him knows about this, how can our 3 great sword realms exist? Sword Lord Gu said. Although they didn't participate in the grudge between the ancient gods and didn't want to get involved, the 3 great sword realms would definitely be destroyed by the other party. This was beyond doubt. So, Avicii, God Lu, and Dragon Master made an agreement. The three great sword realms will hold a sword battle and choose the most talented descendant of the three god lords. By infusing the three great sword realms with the power of the three great sword realms, the sword god king's Tao will be forcefully infused into the successor, creating a great miracle. Sword Lord Gu said, "Create a god king." Qin Hao's eyes widened. Everyone's hearts were in turmoil. We don't know who killed Sword God King, and we don't know when that day will repeat itself in the three great sword realms. In order to prevent the great sword realm from being destroyed, we can only fight with all our strength. Sword God Avicii felt powerless. Even as a god lord of a realm and with the power of God Lu and Dragon Master, they couldn't fight against a god king who ruled over all the realms. Unless the three great sword realms gave birth to someone who surpassed the God Lord level and reappeared at the peak of the ancient sword Tao. Otherwise, tragedy was inevitable. Not just the Avicii realm, but the three great sword realms would be completely wiped out. Chapter 2072. The three sword realms originated from the Tao of the Sword God King. Just as the Divine Lord said, every continent, every river, and even every speck of dust had traces of the Sword God King. The Sword God King had fallen, so his sword Tao was naturally not allowed to exist. When that day came, the three sword realms would be destroyed. Sword God Avicii, God Lu, and Dragon Master would not be spared. The realms would be destroyed. People would also die. Even if the ancient deity king who had destroyed the Sword God King spared the lives of the three divine lords, their tens of thousands of years of cultivation, heavenly wheels, and all the divine power in their bodies would be mercilessly extracted because that was the Sword God King's Tao. Not only the three divine lords, but also the 6 elders, the 4 giants of the deity realm, and the many sword Tao masters in Rikugenji and Zhenlong world would have any traces of their sword Tao erased, and they would eventually become ordinary people. It was enough to imagine that they would rather die. In the process of cultivating to the divine level, every single person here had put in a lot of sweat and suffered a lot of hardships. Qin Hao's path to becoming a divine god was extremely difficult. It was something that countless generations of people in the divine wilderness had sacrificed their lives in exchange for. On Sunset Peak, when the divine light shone, the martial arts of the entire continent were crying. Think about it, Divine Lord Avicii, Dragon Master, and God Lu would not be willing to wait for death and be destroyed. That was absolutely impossible. The deity king could destroy a world with a snap of his fingers. Instead of dying in despair, they would rather burn to their heart's content. This was the goal of the divine sword god Avicii and Dongxing deity king. The birth of Loi was only the first step to recreating the sword god king. In the Supreme Tower, everyone's hearts were unusually heavy. After listening to Divine Lord Avicii's words, they finally understood the hidden dangers of the sword realm. It was actually in danger of being destroyed. The battle of the ancient gods happened so long ago. Maybe they have already forgotten. Qin Hao tried to ease the atmosphere. The Sword God King had the ability to escape a wisp of sword will without being discovered. The Great Path Sword Realm might not attract the attention of the opponent. He did not want to be too worried and scare himself. Divine Lord Avicii shook his head. It will happen sooner or later. Although the sword world had always been stable and peaceful, that was because the realm spirit had been weak in the beginning. Everyone and everything in the world was improving. When the swordsmen of the Great Path Sword World were strong enough, they would definitely attract attention again. That ancient god had personally killed the Sword God King and would definitely recognize his will of Wei. Maybe he died long ago, just like the Sword God King. Wuk spoke. In a battle between God Kings, if things didn't go well, both sides would be heavily injured and die together. Or maybe he didn't die. Let's say he was heavily injured and coincidentally, at this moment, the other god kings took the opportunity to act and ended him. You really know how to make things up. Qin Hao didn't realize that Wuk had such a rich imagination. Only a fool would believe you. Loi rolled her eyes at Wuk. Of course, it would be best if we perish together. However, we need to take precautions. The sword realm of the Great Path is originally one. God Lu, Dragon Master, and I have all reached the limit of our cultivation. Our swordsmanship cannot progress any further. If we can really cultivate a miracle that surpasses the almighty Master Realm, wouldn't that be a good thing for the swordsmanship and millions of swordsmen? Divine Lord Avicii felt a sense of accomplishment. Qin Hao smiled foolishly. The three divine masters had done this personally, pouring the origin sword intent of the three great sword realms into a single person's body. In theory, there was a slight possibility of creating a divine king, but that was only in theory. Would the actual process really be as smooth as the theory? Qin Hao did not have any confidence in his heart. He secretly glanced at Wuk and Luo Yi. If there was really someone among the sword cultivators who could withstand the divine king's will of the three great sword realms and not die, then this person, Wuk, was the most suitable. Qin Hao wasn't biased. Loi, Lu Qiu, and Long Miao could be called first-rate geniuses in the primitive universe regardless of whether it was their inherited bloodline or their temperament. However, that was all. Their heavenly wheels were destined to be unable to withstand the Sword God King's will of Tao. Otherwise, why didn't Divine Lord Avicii, God Lu, and Dragon Master try it themselves? Just now, Divine Lord Avicii had said that his cultivation had reached a limit and could no longer break through from Divine Lord. The reason was none other than the grade of his heavenly wheels. The limit was right there. Wuk was different. Wuk hadn't forged his heavenly wheels yet. He had the power of the original realm, and had a high chance of making his heavenly wheels perfect. Perfect heavenly wheels were the prerequisite to becoming a God King. Moreover, it was a hard requirement. Therefore, if they really wanted to create a God King, Qin Hao felt that Wuk was more qualified and more suitable than him. This was because Wuk's sword Tao was refined and pure. Of course, he couldn't say this in front of all the big shots. After all, Wuk hadn't stepped into the divine path, and wouldn't believe him. Loi, now you understand what the old man said. The burden on your shoulders is very heavy. He hoped that when the sword battle came in the future, the winner would be Loi. The Sword God King came from the Avicii realm, and not Rikujinji or the true dragon tribe. Loi lowered her head slightly. At this moment, she didn't have the unparalleled sharpness that she had during the sword competition. If she didn't know anything, her beard would still be wild. However, after hearing about the origin of the Great Path Sword Realm, could she really bear the burden of the Sword Tao? The Sword God King was dead. If the ancient god who killed the Sword God King came one day, would she be able to hold the sword in her hand, protect the Tao in her heart, and protect the people around her? Loi didn't know, but when that day came, she wouldn't retreat. Even if she died, she would spill her blood in this academy. And him? Loi silently looked at Qin Hao. The silver-haired guy would probably face the future of the Great Path Sword Realm with her, as well as Wuk and Li Guangxing. Well, the future is determined by the heavens. Do what you have to do. Don't put too much pressure on the children. Divine Lord Avicii looked at Qin Hao and the others. The four of you go out and find an elder to familiarize yourself with the academy. There are many wonderful places in the academy. In a few days, I will ask Tianyang to arrange for people to guide and supervise your cultivation. Go. Yes. Wuk said respectfully. Wait. Qin Hao took a few steps forward and came before Divine Lord Avicii. Senior, I have something to ask you about a person in the Great Path Sword Realm. Who? Divine Lord Avicii asked. The martial god. Qin Hao's expression darkened. What's your relationship with the martial god? Divine Lord Avicii was slightly surprised. When he sparred with Loi, he saw the power of the 9 palaces on Qin Hao. It was the martial god's ultimate technique. It's a lost elder of mine, Qin Hao said. When I came here, I heard that he specifically challenged the famous sword gods of the Great Path Sword Realm to spar with. With your extraordinary strength, have you ever fought with the martial god? Fought? Divine Lord Avicii smiled and nodded. Yes, I did. Not only him, but God Lu and Dragon Master were also targeted by the martial god. Even the 6 elders of the Academy and the Dongxing Immortal were not spared. The martial god, that be *starred, appeared out of nowhere and made the Great Path Sword Realm a mess. He had offended many people. Of course, there were even more people who were afraid of the martial god. Who won? Wuk was excited. The martial god, the ancestral patriarch of the Divine Palace, was the last expert to become a god at the end of the primordial spirit era in the Divine Barren Land. He was a martial artist of the Divine Barren Land. The martial god is extremely powerful and has a limitless future. As for the outcome, you don't need to know. Divine Lord Avicii said mysteriously. Sword Lord Gu, Blind Sword Lord, and Sword God Severing Love chuckled silently from afar. They had witnessed the battle between the martial god and Avicii with their own eyes. It was a wonderful battle. Unfortunately, the martial god's cultivation was too shallow. Compared to the 3 divine lords of the Great Path Sword Realm, he lacked the foundation. Otherwise, the 3 divine lords might have been defeated by him one by one. It seems that he lost. Wuk lowered his head. From the expression of Sword God Avicii, he could see that he did not want to say the outcome because he wanted to save the martial god's face. It made sense. According to the Primordial Spirit Era and the Primordial Spirit Era, the martial god ancestral patriarch only had 20,000 years of cultivation. Even if he had the power of the original realm, it was normal for him to lose to the 3 divine lords. Then how can I find him? Qin Hao asked excitedly. The martial god ancestral patriarch was indeed hiding in the Great Path Sword Realm. If he could find him, he would not have to worry about anything in the future. Divine Lord Avicii shook his head. His whereabouts are uncertain. No one knows where he is, not even me. But when the day of the sword battle between God Lu and I comes, I guess that the martial god will definitely appear. The martial god's celestial wheel was too powerful, and so was his will. It was enough to block the perception of the 3 divine lords. Every time he failed to spar with them, he would hide in some corner to cultivate. The next time he appeared, his cultivation would have improved. It was quite shocking. Although they could not find him, the martial god would not miss the day of the sword battle. Thank you, Senior Divine Lord. I will take my leave. Wuk, let's go. Qin Hao said happily as he left the Supreme Tower with Wuk. These 2 little guys are very talented in the way of the sword. Aren't they from the Heaven Wall realm? Why did they call the martial god an elder? The blind sword venerable wondered. The Great Path is boundless. It doesn't matter where the origin is. Didn't the martial god also say that he was from the Great Path Sword Realm? Divine Lord Avicii chuckled. The martial god was indeed strong, but his way of the sword was very ordinary. It was even a bit embarrassing. The martial god was more like a body cultivator. But even so, he still called himself a sword god. What could he do? Senior, I also have something that has been bothering me for a long time. Li Guangxing was about to attack when Divine Lord Avicii waved his hand and interrupted him. I know what you want to ask. I will give you a clear answer. You can leave now. All right, I will leave first. Li Guangxing bowed slightly and walked out with the dust Taoist. Avicii, his situation is a bit similar to yours. Could it be that he also has? Sword Venerable Gu sensed Li Guangxing's aura and guessed. Divine Lord Avicii stopped Sword Venerable Gu from continuing. He waved his hand at the big shots of the God Realm. Everyone understood and left the Supreme Tower. At this time, Sword Venerable Gu glanced at the Venerable Immortal and Loi and said, You guys talk. Then, he left with the other 5 elders. What followed was a family matter. This was the first time she saw her father in person. She should have a lot to say. How should I address you? After everyone left, Loy looked at Sword God Avicii. Of course you are, my daughter. Divine Lord Avicii stepped forward and gently stroked Loy's soft cheeks with the back of his hand. Father. Loy's nose twitched and she threw herself into Divine Lord Avicii's arms. She couldn't hold back her tears and they fell like pearls. Beside them, Venerable Dongxing stood there, his smile full of warmth. Chapter 2073. After the Academy Sword Conference ended, the ancient Void Mirage opened to the entire Divine Plane. All the swordsmen from different continents who came for the Sword Conference all flocked into the ancient Void Mirage. Now, the West Capital was bustling with activity. The ancient Void Mirage was an ancient mirage created by the Sword God King's will. It was vast and had its own universe. It hid many ancient treasures and relics of swordsmanship. Naturally, some places were dangerous. Divine Master Wu Jian left sword wills to warn the more dangerous places. Unless the swordsmen who entered the ancient Void Mirage were stupid enough to force their way in, their lives would not be in danger. However, this had nothing to do with Qin Hao and the rest. Now, Wuk and the other 3 were staying in the academy to cultivate. Ancestor Wu Jun left the divine wilderness and wandered the worlds. He settled down in the Great Path Sword Realm under the name of Martial God. His whereabouts were unpredictable. Unless he showed himself, the 3 divine masters would not be able to find him. Qin Hao did not insist. Since he had come to the Great Path Sword Realm with Wuk, he would meet the ancestors sooner or later. Moreover, Senior Wu Jian had said that Martial God would appear on the day of the Sword Conference of the 3 realms. Sword God Wu Jian and Immortal Master Dong Xing created gods to welcome the Sword Conference of the 3 realms. The purpose of the conference was to reappear the pinnacle of the ancient swordsmanship and cultivate a Sword God King to prevent the Great Path Sword Realm from being destroyed. The conditions for becoming a divine king were extremely harsh, and the process was fraught with difficulties. Qin Hao couldn't predict whether the 3 divine lords would succeed, but this sword battle had extraordinary significance. No matter who won, Luo Yi, Lu Qiu, or Long Miao would become the target of the 3 divine lords' joint grooming. The entire Great Way of the Sword Realm would view the Divine Sword King as the supreme ruler. It seemed that there was a need to fight. If Wuk won the Sword Conference of the 3 realms, he would be the master of the sword world and command the billions of swordsmen in the untainted land. Qin Hao controlled the Origin Realm and carried the power of all living beings in the Kunlun Plain. As long as he was given enough time to strengthen the Origin Realm of the Divine Wilderness, when all the gods gathered, he would have taken the first step to becoming a divine king. This was his capital to return to the primeval realm, and he had to return. And at that time, whether or not Wuk became the Sword God King would be equally important to Qin Hao. When 2 God Kings stepped foot into the primeval realm, no matter who they faced, they would have to give them some face. They didn't need to look at anyone's face, and there definitely wouldn't be a second time where they had their souls pulled out and banished to the lower realms. He had to help Wuk win the sword battle of the 3 realms. In the library, Qin Hao came out from the academy. The Academy's book collection pavilion had organized a large number of books about swordsmanship and swordsmanship. Every book was full of mysteries. He had benefited a lot from reading them in the past few days. The library of the Academy was different from Donghuang's pavilion. The books in Donghuang's pavilion were all about the way of the space, but the Academy had combined the divine will of space with the way of the sword, giving birth to extraordinary swordsmanships that contained the power of space. Qin Hao had combined the strengths of both, and his control of the great way of space was getting stronger and stronger. He could clearly feel that he wasn't far from condensing a second divine power. It seems that I have to find teacher. Qin Hao stood at the bottom of the stone steps of the library and exhaled a long breath. Now, the academy had deployed 4 elders with profound skills to give them one-on-one guidance. If they encountered any problems in cultivation, they could find teacher to solve them. As the head of the 6 founding elders, Sword Venerable Gu had chosen Loi. Severing Love was a sword god, and his way of the sword was extraordinary, which coincided with Wux's. Li Guangxing was a disciple of the grass sword Venerable, and he cultivated a very special sword power of the Great Way. The academy naturally sent Qin Hao a teacher, Blind Sword. Senior Blind Sword was very powerful, and his skills were ranked second among the 6 founding elders, second only to Sword Venerable Gu. Moreover, his understanding of the way of the sword was unparalleled. After several encounters, Qin Hao found that Senior Blind Sword's way of the sword was terrifying, and his use of way was often beyond the imagination of others. Although he was ranked second, Qin Hao judged that Sword Venerable Gu was no match for Blind Sword in a real fight. Unfortunately, Blind Sword was limited by the Sky Wheel. Otherwise, his achievements might not be below Divine Lord Avicii's. Qin Hao felt heartfelt admiration for such a powerful teacher with a transcendent philosophy. Naturally, he liked him very much. It's been more than 100 years since we left the divine wilderness. In another few decades, Ah Wu and the rest should have used the power of the original realm to forge the Sky Wheel. Xin and the rest left the divine plane and returned to the Heaven's Wall realm. During this time, he also visited Qin Hao and Wuk at the academy, and told them many things to cultivate well. It was good to go back first. The Heaven's Wall realm and the Great Way Sword realm were separated by the vast untainted land. Although the journey was long, with Xin's cultivation, it would at most take a little longer. Perhaps the next time he came, he would be able to bring Ah Wu and the rest to the Sword realm, which would save Qin Hao some trouble. He was really afraid that Zhan Wu would cause trouble for Dong Huang in a moment of anger. At present, they could not afford to offend the god of the East. Xiao Han, Craze Tang, Qin Xiaohe, and Chu Yu stayed in the West capital to help Zhang Ji maintain order in the ancient void illusion. Divine Lord Taichu also stayed behind to take care of the juniors outside the academy. Other than the different living quarters, Qin Hao did not find it inconvenient. He and Wuk could go out at any time. They just had to inform the elders, and they could go to the West capital. The academy did not restrict the freedom of the disciples. However, Qin Hao did not know that he and Wuk were exceptions. It was not easy for the other disciples of the academy to go out, probably because of Si Kong. At this moment, a figure stood under the 9 heavens silver waterfall of the academy. He carried an ancient sword on his back and carried the dust of Taoist in his arms as he endured the scouring of the Sword River. It was Li Guangxing. This silver waterfall was not simple. It was derived from the sword will of the elders, and it was called the 9 heavens sword waterfall. The disciples of the academy often came to the sword waterfall to train their swordsmanship. Standing under the waterfall and enduring the scouring of the Sword River could cleanse the swordsman's sword will and temperament. It was said that the senior brothers of the academy said that the 9 waves of the sword waterfall were each stronger than the last. It would set off waves according to the cultivation of the swordsman. The stronger the cultivation, the stronger the sword waves. However, no matter who it was, the difficulty was the same. Now, Li Guangxing stood under the sword waterfall to wash his body. The sound of the great path rumbled continuously. He endured the 7 waves and attracted many disciples to watch. Rumble! The sword waterfall erupted with an intense impact. The surging river water surged, and dense sword light flickered within. From afar it looked like billions of divine swords were attacking from the 9 heavens, ruthlessly smashing towards a person's head. Every drop of water was a sharp sword. One could imagine how terrifying the scene was with the impact of tens of thousands of sword streams. Buzz! The heavenly wheel of the divine path bloomed above Li Guangxing's body. Suddenly, divine light overflowed in all directions. A burst of sword will whistled and rose against the billions of divine swords in an attempt to resist the eighth wave. At this moment, the sword waterfall seemed to have sensed Li Guangxing's increase in strength. Suddenly, billions of sword currents gathered and condensed into a sword. The sword waterfall was like a heavenly heavy sword, majestic as it fell down. Swoosh! A sharp tearing sound resounded in the air. It was like silk being torn apart. Li Guangxing's rising sword will was pushed back by the heavy sword. It was divided into two in the middle. The terrifying sword light fell down from above his head. Go! With a flick of his hand, the ancient sword on his back came out of its scabbard. This was Li Guangxing's life weapon, forged by his sword spirit. This sword was like a beautiful firework that soared into the sky. It clashed with the falling nine heavens' heavy sword. Immediately, a muffled sound exploded in the void. Turbulent waves rolled toward the two sides of the cliff. The straight river of swords became distorted. However, that heavy aura still suppressed Li Guangxing's life weapon. The ancient sword flew out in a spin. Close by, the river of swords heavily smashed onto Li Guangxing's body. The second his body came in contact with the water, he was blown away. Zing! 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 Li Guangxing's legs were shaking. He landed on the shore and took a few steps back. Only when a powerful palm pressed down on his shoulder did he manage to stabilize his body. "You're amazing, brother." Qin Hao smiled. Li Guangxing turned around and saw Qin Hao. He sighed helplessly. "Unfortunately, you still can't withstand the eighth wave of swords." This eighth wave of swords contained the powerful will of Wei of at least 5 elders. When the 5 sword wills merged, no matter what the sword's characteristics were, it was impossible to resist. Indeed, the sword wills merged into the eighth wave. Other than the 4 elders, there is also the power of the wind sword of the supreme swordsman of the wind sword. Where the sword wills point, the power is like a prairie fire. Junior brother Li has just entered the academy, but he can withstand the 7th wave. It's really impressive, a disciple of the academy who was watching from the outside praised. Many people agreed. Li Guangxing's sword wills were much stronger than when they entered the academy. Let me try. Qin Hao strode forward and jumped down to the bottom of the sword waterfall. He stood on a 10,000-year-old bluestone. Junior brother, it's up to you. Li Guangxing raised his hand to call back the famous ancient sword. He put it back into the scabbard and looked at Qin Hao with interest. He remembered that on the day of the sword competition, Qin Hao had not made a move. In the end, he was forced into a dead end by Loi. In the end, he exploded and shocked the entire divine region. He was evenly matched with Loi. To be fair, Li Guangxing did not have the confidence to win against Loi. Naturally, his chances of winning against Qin Hao were very small. The 4 new junior brothers are all very strong. Isn't that so? Junior sister Luo is the daughter of the Divine Master and the Immortal Lord. I heard that on the day of the sword competition, Danqing was looked down upon by junior sister Loi. In the end, she chose junior brother Chu San for the sword competition. Ha ha. Yes. It's too funny. How embarrassing. Hey, junior brother Chu San, Danqing's record in the sword waterfall is also the 7 waves. You must break his record. On both sides of the sword waterfall, many disciples of the academy shouted and encouraged Qin Hao, who was on the bluestone. They did not care about one of the disciples who was so angry that his face turned blue. Junior brother Chu San, if you can withstand the 8 waves, I will give you the liquor I kept before the ascension stage. Danqing put his palms beside his mouth and shouted loudly. His face was full of smiles. How long had it been since he ascended to the ascension stage? It had been thousands of years. It was a good liquor that had been kept in the mortal world until now. But he did not know if Qin Hao had the ability to drink it. Chapter 2074. Boom, boom, boom. In the 9 heavens soared waterfall, the sound of the great path soared resounded throughout the sky. Waves after waves of violent waves crashed into Qin Hao's body. The surface of his body was enveloped in a layer of hazy halo, and not a drop of water could touch it. Gradually, as the waves overpowered the previous one, the halo became stronger and stronger, until a majestic divine light shot up from the bluestone into the sky, forcefully cutting the rapid waterfall apart. Which wave is this? The 8th wave. Looking at the situation, he didn't use much strength at all. Monster. On both sides of the sword waterfall, the outstanding disciples of the academy were dumbfounded. In 10 minutes, Qin Hao broke through 8 waves consecutively. He didn't bear it, but directly used sword will to break through the sword momentum of the silver waterfall. His posture was extremely domineering. Next, it was the 9th wave. At this moment, Qin Hao had his hands behind his back as he stood towering on the 10,000-year-old limestone, and he raised his eyes to look above. After the 8-layer waves passed, the sword waterfall calmed down, and the river water seemed as if it was still, and the slightly flickering waves of scales seemed to contain an extraordinary might. The first wave is the power of the sword. It's very pure, without any sword will, only sharpness. The second wave contains artistic conception. Without a firm sword heart, it's easy to be shaken out by the water of the waterfall. The third wave contains the power of the sword, artistic conception, and the attribute of the sword way. It's like 10,000 mountains descending. Every wave felt different. In addition to the 10,000 mountains descending, the 4th wave had another attribute. It was soft like grass, but tough. The 5th wave contained 3 attributes, and so on. In the 9 waves of the sword waterfall, each wave was stronger than the last. Just now, Qin Hao broke through the 8th wave, breaking the sword momentum of the storm that suppressed Li Guangxing. Now, only the last wave was left. Boom! The quiet river of swords regained its vigor. The tranquil surface of the water was like a heavenly river that had opened its floodgates. Within the surging white waves, there were actually figures dancing with swords. Every figure's silhouette was like 6 doyens riding the river and dancing with their swords. The sword light that was swept up was extremely fierce. Their sword will is merging. The sword momentum of the 9th wave is no longer just 6 doyens. The sword wills of the 6 elders fused into the final layer, but they were not 6 independent entities. Instead, the 6 sword wills intertwined to form a brand new power. In an instant, the look in Qin Hao's eyes changed. His eyes, which were flashing with flaming patterns, shot toward the shadows, as if he could see through the essence of their swordsmanship. Then, Qin Hao raised one of his hands behind his back and pointed upward. Whoosh! The fine sword splendor blended into the river. Its speed was incomparably fast, as if it had turned into an afterimage, appearing in front of the 6 elders. The afterimage streaked past, and before the 9 layers of momentum had finished brewing, the elders' figures were destroyed one after another. Boom! The surging sword waterfall lost its shape, as if a person's soul had been shattered, falling into a hysterical riot. The sword river flowed in reverse, the waves rose, and the waterfall actually flowed back to the source. The scene was magnificent. It can't be. Oh my God! All the disciples were shocked. Apart from the first 2, the 3rd disciple of the academy had withstood the sword waterfall 9 waves today. However, Qin Hao was different from the first 2. He did not bear the impact of the sword waterfall, but completely broke through the 9 layers of sword wave. There was an essential difference between the 2. What a monster! Junior brother, how did you do it? Someone asked Qin Hao. Yes, junior brother Chu-san, I also want to know. Li Guangxing looked up at the sword waterfall. The 9 waves had been broken, and the waterfall flowed in reverse. The sword will emanating from Qin Hao's body had already forced the 9 heavens sword waterfall to stay away from him. Among all the skills in the world, only speed is unbreakable. Qin Hao responded with a smile, leaped into the sky, and disappeared. Since his sword could break through the sword momentum, why not go through the baptism? Boom! The reverse waterfall exploded with a roar. As Qin Hao's aura disappeared, the river flowed down and returned to its original state. The sword waterfall has become a spirit. Everyone was speechless. They deeply understood what it meant to bully the weak and fear the strong. Qin Hao had just left, and it was arrogant again. All the disciples knew that speed was unbreakable, but who could really do it? The difficulty was not as simple as 1 or 2 sentences. Junior brother Chu-san has left. He just secretly transmitted a message to you to leave the wine for me. Junior brother Danqing, I won't be polite. Quickly take it out and let me taste it. A middle-aged disciple stretched out his hand to Danqing with a solemn expression. Junior brother Chu-san also transmitted a message to me and let me taste it together. Me too. Me too. One by one, they stretched out their hands in front of Danqing. Looking at their righteous appearances, Danqing felt 1,000 swords whistling in his heart. He really wanted to stab this group of people to death on the spot. Secretly transmitted a message? Why did they have to do it secretly? Who were they trying to fool? However, he could not beat them. Danqing had to take out the wine and share it with everyone. Listen over there. The sword chime of the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. Junior brother Chu-san has gone to cause trouble. Let's go and have a look. In the distance, the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda burst into thousands of divine lights. A gorgeous divine sword shadow broke out of the window and circled around the sword pagoda, flying in the void. Li Guangxing's expression changed slightly, and he flew over there. Not long ago, he and Loi stimulated the 9th floor of the sword pagoda and summoned 80 swords. Only the last sword had not appeared. Now, Li Chuji had gone to the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. Could he completely understand the 81 swords of the Divine Master? Chapter 2075. The Swordsmanship-Seeking Pagoda. Loi sat under the pagoda with a focused expression. Sword will permeated her body as she tried to resonate with the sword spirits in the pagoda and comprehend the Divine Master sword will contained within. She had been cultivating here for a long time. Since the day she entered the academy, the last sword had become a knot in her heart. She had longed to summon it and complete the 81 swords. However, she had never been able to do so. At this moment, Luo Yi looked at the silver-haired youth standing not far away from her. Qin Hao was surrounded by divine light, and his sword aura soared into the sky. His sword will whizzed out and climbed up along the ancient pagoda. Every time the sword will covered a floor, 9 beams of divine light would penetrate through the window and fly high into the sky. So far, the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda had been influenced by Qin Hao's sword will. 8 floors had been lit and 72 swords had been unleashed. There was no gap in the entire process. It's the 9th floor, Loi murmured. Her heart was not calm. When she first came here to ask for swords, the speed of awakening the sword spirits was not as fast as Qin Hao. This guy would have no problem rushing to the 9th floor. She just did not know if he could summon the last sword. Qin Hao raised his head and stared at the towering ancient pagoda. Standing at the foot of the pagoda, he couldn't help but feel tiny in his heart. This was a kind of momentum. It was the innate momentum of the Divine Master. There were 81 swords in the pagoda. Each sword spirit was engraved with the will of the Divine Master of Avicii. There were 81 sword wills in total. The entire ancient pagoda was no doubt equivalent to an avatar of the Divine Master. One could imagine the pressure it released. Go! Qin Hao bellowed, and the billowing sword intent rushed up. He did not feel small under the pagoda. On the contrary, through the momentum of the Divine Master, he vaguely raised his own limits. Even if his cultivation was not there, his state of mind was there. At this moment, he gave off the feeling that he was standing there as the divine master. Boom! The sword will of the great path rushed forward. The swordsmanship-seeking pagoda trembled. The sound of swords crisscrossed in the void. At this moment, the light that covered the 8th floor continued to spread upwards, climbing up to the 9th floor. Sword windows lit up one after another, and sharp light broke through the windows. The shape of each light was different, and there were a total of 80 divine swords of different shapes flying outside the tower. It was a spectacular sight. Junior Chu-san is strong. Impressive. There's only one sword left. I wonder if junior brother can break it. Many disciples of the academy had gathered around the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. Li Guangxing and the others had also rushed over from the sword waterfall. At this moment, everyone witnessed Qin Hao comprehending 80 swords and drawing out 80 sword spirits from the pagoda. They danced freely with his sword intent, which was really amazing. Resonance, comprehension, and whether or not one could fully control it, there were 3 levels. Qin Hao drew out the sword spirit and used his own sword intent to drive the divine sword, achieving the last type. His performance could be said to be perfect. In fact, it was better than Loi and Li Guangxing. However, summoning the last sword spirit was not easy. So far, not a single disciple in the Seamless Academy had been able to do it. Only a few elders, such as Tianyang Kenshin, and the 6 founding elders had been able to do it. Therefore, the disciples also wanted to witness a miracle, which was enough to set a record in the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. The last sword in the pagoda is not a sword. In other words, there are number 81 swords on the 9th floor. The so-called last sword is nothing more than oneself. Qin Hao's Wei will whistled all over his body. Threads of light of catastrophe flickered, covering the weak aura of the perfect celestial wheel below his body. His eyes would not deceive him. Even if what the 10,000 spirit fire eyes saw was not real, his perception would not be wrong. The power of the original realm seeped into the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. No matter what kind of sword intent the last sword contained, it would definitely not transcend the complete heavenly path. However, after searching all 9 floors, there was no trace of the last sword. There were number 81 swords in the pagoda. Qin Hao suddenly understood. No wonder Li Guangxing could not be summoned. Loi tried her best to mobilize the power of the Great Path, but could not resonate with the last sword. If he guessed correctly, the last sword needed the warrior to fill in the gaps and integrate the sword intent to give birth to the last sword. It was almost impossible for an ordinary divine path to evolve a divine master-level sword intent. Even if there was a genius who saw through this step and cast a sword spirit, it would definitely not resonate with the other 80 swords. It was basically a doomed situation. Fortunately, my great path aura is complete. It is a complete celestial wheel. Qin Hao smiled. Others could not do it. If someone as strong as Loi could not understand it, she would not be able to draw out the last sword either. However, Qin Hao could do it. No matter what kind of sword intent he integrated into the pagoda, it would not be rejected by the other 80 sword spirit. This was because his path was a complete sword path. Come out! Qin Hao roared heroically. He raised his arm and pulled at the last dim window on the 9th floor of the ancient pagoda. Whoosh! There was an ear-piercing sound of friction in the air, as if 2 pieces of hard metal were rubbing against each other. Then, everyone covered their chests in shock. The pitch-black empty window on the 9th floor gradually lit up and became brighter and brighter. A fiery red sword shape slowly extended out. With a clang, it broke free from the shackles of the ancient pagoda. It jumped out of the majestic divine master momentum and became a divine sword surrounded by bloody flames. It flew toward the sword spirits in the sky and was finally placed in the center, surrounded by the 80 sword spirit. This I can't believe my eyes. The last sword contains the great Tao of fire. How is this possible? The 81st sword of the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda has appeared. The 81st sword has appeared. Some disciples seemed to have gone mad. They shouted loudly and ran toward the sword peaks of the academy. Almost at the same time, powerful auras descended on the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. Every figure that descended was an elder of the academy. There was no lack of sword gods who had been in seclusion for many years. When they arrived and saw the 81 sword spirits flying in front of the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, they were all stunned. The 81st sword has appeared. Li Guangxing's heart trembled violently. He squeezed the dust of Tao in his hand tightly. His body trembled with excitement. Loi stood up from her meditation. However, the moment she stood up, she was stunned. It was as if her soul had fallen into the 81 sword spirit. Interesting. At this time, in the Supreme Tower, Divine Lord Avicii, who was playing chess with Sword Venerable Gu, suddenly stopped above the chessboard. He looked through the Divine Tower and sensed the situation in the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. This kid is not simple. Although he used the wrong method, the result did not change, Sword Venerable Gu said. Gu Jianzun said. His calm expression flashed with a hint of palpitation, as if he had guessed something. It is not surprising that he has a perfect heaven wheel. After all, he is the descendant of the martial god. Divine Lord Avicii placed his chess piece. The black pieces surrounded the white pieces. There was a flash of brilliance, and the chessboard disappeared. Brother, you have lost, Divine Lord Avicii said with a smile. Sword Venerable Gu nodded. It is normal to lose to you. Why don't you tell them that the martial god is in the academy? Karma has its own destiny. When it is time to show up, I will show up. There is no need to mess up the game of others. Divine Lord Avicii said, a true gentleman does not speak when watching a chess game. He knew that the martial god must have sensed Qin Hao. As for how to contact him and what to do, the martial god would arrange it. You are right. Sword Venerable Gu stood up slowly with his hands behind his back. His worried heart suddenly calmed down. 2 perfect heaven wheels. It seems that the future of the Great Path Sword Realm is not too bad. When the time comes, there will be a way to break the tribulation. My ability is limited. It depends on the martial god. Empyrean Divine Lord's heart was still heavy. The 3 of them had an agreement with the martial god that they would share the burden. However, the martial god's cultivation was still too shallow. When the raging waves engulfed the sword world, would he be able to withstand them? The swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. The space was silent. After dozens of breaths, there was a sudden burst of loud cheers. The disciples of the academy laughed wildly and surrounded Qin Hao. They were all excited and wanted to line up and hug him. Junior brother has broken the shackles of the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. He is really strong. We are so envious and jealous. But I am very curious. Why did the last sword in the pagoda contain the great path of flame? Divine Lord cultivates the sword will of space. Why do you care so much? Junior brother, tell us quickly. Is there a trick to awakening the last sword? The disciples asked one after another. Ahem, the sword way depends on one's understanding and experimentation. Everyone's way is different. My understanding may not be suitable for all of you, Qin Hao said. Could he say that the last sword was his sword will? As for the trick to awaken it, his words were very clear. It depended on one's attempt. Junior brother, although it is simple, your understanding of the sword way is really profound. One of the senior brothers fell into deep contemplation. Junior brother Chu-san, here is the aged wine of the mortal world. Just now, the senior brothers snatched it quickly. I risked my life and only managed to keep the last mouthful. Danqing smiled and passed the wine jar to Qin Hao. Qin Hao held it in his hand and poured it down his throat. The wine brewed from grains was naturally not as good as the immortal nectar, but it had a different taste of the mortal world. It could not help but make one think of thousands of things. Good wine. A hot feeling slid down his throat. Qin Hao returned the wine jar to Danqing and exuded a heroic aura. He leaped up and turned into a ray of light, heading in another direction. Sword Pavilion. Danqing looked over. Qin Hao's target was the Sword Pavilion of the Academy. Junior brother Chu San is going to cause trouble again. The Sword Pavilion has 9 echoes. I wonder how many he can withstand. Let's go and have a look. The disciples from the Sword Waterfall joined the team of the Sword Pagoda, forming a mighty lineup and heading to the Sword Pavilion at the same time. Junior sister Loi, don't you want to go and have a look? Li Guangxing asked. Loi shook her head, as if she had just recovered from the 81 sword spirit. She looked at the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, which had calmed down again. The sharpness in her eyes became more and more intense. I want to ask for the 81st sword. Li Guangxing took a deep breath and nodded silently. Loi was very stubborn and would not give up until she reached her goal. This was also a good thing. Then he turned into a ray of light and flew to the Sword Pavilion. He wanted to see what Qin Hao would do. Could it be that this guy wanted to break into all the sword training halls of the academy? The Sword Pavilion was an ancient and magnificent sword tower. Countless kinds of sword wills were sealed inside by the Divine Master. When the sword wills resonated, they would cause the sword sound of the Great Law, which would deeply stimulate the mind of a swordsman and temper his sword heart and sword way. Ordinary people could not bear it. It was said that the Sword Pavilion had 9 echoes, which was the strongest. Few disciples could withstand it completely. If it was light, their sword soul would be damaged. If it was serious, they might be stimulated by the sword sound and go crazy. At this moment, the ancient Sword Pavilion emitted a dazzling radiance. The gorgeous radiance clasped tightly onto the ground. From the outside, it looked like a glowing bell pressing down on the ground. The vigorous clashing sounds from the bell could shatter a person's liver and gallbladder. How many echoes has it been? Qin Hao asked the disciple outside the Sword Pavilion. The 7th echo. Junior brother Wuck's sword heart is really strong. When I first came to the academy, I couldn't even withstand 3 echoes. By the way, are you together? The disciple asked. Qin Hao nodded. Yes, we are together. Junior brother, you have to work hard. Junior brother Wuck's talent is really terrifying. The disciple encouraged. He was worried for Qin Hao. The disciples in the same batch were often compared by the elders. It was very embarrassing to be inferior. If one's state of mind was unstable, it would be easy to be affected. I will work hard. Qin Hao smiled and stared at the Sword Pavilion. The 7th echo. Wuck had reached this level without forging the celestial wheel. He was stronger than the old disciples of the previous batches. It was obvious that his talent was monstrous. However, Qin Hao was not bad either. At least his current endurance was definitely stronger than Wuck's. Chapter 2076. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation swept out. Wuck was meditating in the Sword Pavilion. The empty Sword Pavilion was filled with sword wills. Thousands of sword wills intertwined. Some were as powerful as mountains, some were as sharp as blades, some were as soft as water, and some were as cold as ice. Every sword will was different and extremely terrifying. They shuttled back and forth in the Sword Pavilion, constantly attacking Wuck's body. The sonorous sounds of swords colliding with the walls were transmitted to Wuck's spiritual soul. Wuck felt as if thousands of swords were piercing his soul and cutting his flesh. Dong. The 7th sound came from the Sword Pavilion. Lights and shadows intertwined, and the chaotic sound of swords pierced through his eardrums. Wuck's head buzzed and his chi and blood surged. He looked somewhat painful. The golden particles on his body whistled, and the sword lotus of the great path bloomed under him. The sword will of all things flickered on the surface of his body, tenaciously guarding his mind and resisting the violent impact. But after a few breaths, as blood slowly seeped from the corner of his mouth, his expression became more and more distorted. Countless disordered shadows seemed to appear in his body. The sword lotus suddenly collapsed, and hot blood spurted out from his throat, turning into a beam of sword light and escaping in a panic. So scary. Wuck's breath was very chaotic and his hair became messy. He looked back at the sword pavilion, full of fear. 7 sounds from the sword pavilion. Junior brother, you are awesome. Although you didn't make it, not many people can make it to the 7th sound. Junior brother, you have a bright future. The disciples outside were full of praise. Wuck could make it to the 7th sound as a Nirvana emperor. After all the disciples who had entered the sword pavilion to cultivate had cast the heavenly wheel of the great path. Even so, not many people could make it to the 7th sound. Senior brothers, you are flattering me. Wuck smiled. He was naturally happy to be praised. Next to him, Qin Hao clicked his tongue and said, "Only 7 sounds. Kid, you can't make it." Wuck turned around and saw Qin Hao. He snorted and said, "Why don't you go in and try? 7 echoes of the sword pavilion is already amazing. This junior brother probably hasn't entered it before, so he doesn't know how powerful it is." The other disciples disagreed with Qin Hao's point of view. "Alright, I'll go in and have a look." Qin Hao calmly walked towards the sword pavilion. His bearing is not ordinary, but his tone is a bit irritating. A disciple joked with Wuck, "You two entered the academy together, right?" The Academy Sword Conference had caused a sensation in the Divine region. However, the Academy did not pay too much attention to this matter. Most of them were busy cultivating and improving their swordsmanship. Together. "This guy is usually very arrogant," Wuck said. The others smiled. From his behavior, it could be seen that Qin Hao was extremely arrogant. However, which of the people here wasn't arrogant in the past? This kind of arrogance would gradually be worn away with time. Dong. The sound of a strong impact drew everyone's attention back. Qin Hao had already started in the sword pavilion. Then, a group of people arrived and landed on the ground. An old disciple pointed at Jiang'e and asked, "Did he go in?" "Who?" the previous disciple asked curiously. "Junior brother in the 3rd year. Silver hair," the old disciple said solemnly. "Oh, the silver-haired one went in. It has already started." The disciple of Jiang'e turned around and smiled. Come. Line up and watch the show. Let's bet. How many rings?" "Nonsense. 9 rings. Do you dare to bet?" Thump. The disciple who stayed in the sword pavilion was shocked. He looked at the group of gamblers and said in surprise, "Are you serious? 9 rings? Senior brother Weizhe, do you want to bet with us? The odds are 1 to 5. Junior brother in the 3rd year will definitely get 9 rings. The disciple who started the bet had a cunning look in his eyes. "This is a gift for me." The disciple named Weizhe strode forward, rolled up his sleeves, and squatted on the ground. Many disciples of the sword pavilion also rushed over. What kind of joke was this? Could someone withstand 9 rings? They did not believe it. "Senior brother Weizhe, how much should we bet?" someone asked. "Bet as much as you can. I'll bet everything I have. 1 to 5. It's such a big bargain. I'll bet my divine sword as well." Weizhe was a man of his word. With a flash of light in his hand, he took out his precious divine sword and threw it into the bet. Seeing this, the other disciples took out the divine gems in their storage rings. Some people, like Weizhe, also bet their divine weapons. This time, the disciples from the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda and the sword waterfall laughed. "Junior brother Wei, since you are so generous, I won't stand on ceremony." The old disciple took off all the storage rings in his hand and threw them all on the 9 echoes. After that, he carefully turned over and tried to find other useful items on his body. He hated that he could not sit in the gambling house himself. What happened to Brother Wei Jian? Wei Zhe was puzzled. Usually Wei Jian was very stingy. Why did he suddenly become a different person? The 81 sword spirits from the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda broke the 9 waves of the sword waterfall and reversed the sword essence of the waterfall. I wonder if the 9 rings of the sword pavilion can stop Chu San. Outside the crowd, Li Guangxing sighed faintly. Wei Zhe's heart suddenly trembled. Blood seemed to rush from his chest to his throat. He suddenly lost his mind. He lowered his head and looked at the bet. Can I back out? Dong, dong, dong. Sounds of impact kept coming out from the sword pavilion. Every sound seemed to hit the minds of everyone, trying to shatter their souls. At this moment, the outside of the sword pavilion was densely packed with disciples. At a glance, there were no less than 100 disciples. Except for those who were in seclusion, most of the disciples had gathered qi. There were also many elders and deacons. These people were all looking at the dazzling sword pavilion in front of them. They were silently counting in their hearts. When they counted to 8, their expressions changed greatly. Many of the elders' faces twisted. Dong. There was another sound, and an incomparably violent impact spread out. Inside the dazzling sword pavilion, a sound wave mixed with terrifying sword qi swept out. The sound wave caused the seated disciples and elders to release their heavenly wheels one after another, forming a spectacular human wall that was forced to resist. In the process, many disciples who were hit by the sound waves turned pale. 9 rings of the sword pavilion. A new disciple who had just entered had broken the record of the previous disciples. How could they not be shocked? The mighty shadow of the sword radiated into the sky and gushed out from the top of the sword garret. With every sound, the radiating sword radiance grew stronger and stronger. Finally, the light pierced through the sky of the academy. All the cultivators in the divine domain saw the most spectacular scene in their lives from afar. How many rings has it been? An elder asked. 16, the deacon next to him replied. He was shocked beyond words. And he doesn't seem to want to stop, another elder said. At present, Qin Hao not only withstood the unbroken 9 rings of the sword pavilion, but also continued to raise the sword sounds. It seemed that he had entered the way and merged with the sword pavilion to refine the universe of sword way inside. This ability? Was he really just a disciple? And he had just entered the academy not long ago? The elders were all silent. Even the founding members might not be able to do it, but it happened to a disciple. 17:18 The sound of impact in the sword pavilion has stopped. As the powerful sword essence in the outside world gradually dissipated, the sound of agitating the divine soul gradually calmed down. When the mighty radiance of the sword pavilion dissipated, many disciples sat on the ground weakly, as if their strength had been sucked out of them. 18 rings. Only a monster could do that. If it weren't for the fact that the sword principle universe in the sword pavilion was no longer effective on Qin Hao, he would probably be able to make another 18 echoes. After all, the people outside could sense that Qin Hao's aura didn't weaken at all. Instead, it became stronger. Dong. Just when everyone thought that it was over, a sound wave suddenly swept out from the sword pavilion. The impact of the sword essence, which was caught off guard, almost caused the elders present to fall to the ground. Then, Qin Hao's figure appeared in everyone's sight. He slowly walked out of the gate of the sword pavilion. However, the space outside was completely silent. Oh, there are so many people. Qin Hao was also shocked. He looked at the figures standing on the ground, in the air, and on the branches. There were many dignified elders and deacons. He had only tried 9 rings in the sword pavilion to experience life, but it seemed that he had alarmed the entire academy. Junior brother, you're ruthless. Li Guangxing gave Qin Hao a thumbs up. He rarely admired others in his life, but today he had to. It's so. Qin Hao smiled modestly. He walked to Wuck's side and put his hand on his shoulder. Alas, young man, you have to work hard. It was effortless for him to make 18 rings, but Wuck only made it to 7 rings. Wasn't this embarrassing for the divine wilderness? Wuck's face trembled. Keep pretending. Qin Hao possessed the power of the original realm and had cast a perfect sky wheel. Many of the powerful restrictions of the Academy's ashram actually had no effect on him. If it were him who had cast a sky wheel, his performance would not necessarily be worse than Qin Hao's. This guy was obviously bullying him because his cultivation was low. I'm He Can. I've met senior brother once in the He Mansion. I'm willing to be senior brother's sword attendant and serve senior brother. I'll never betray you. At this time, a figure suddenly ran out of the crowd and unexpectedly knelt in front of Qin Hao. He swore to become Qin Hao's sword attendant. He Can, one of Crane Lord's men? Qin Hao looked down and had a vague impression of him. He soon is my father. I hope senior brother can fulfill my wish. He can kowtowed and beg. What did it mean to have 19 rings in the sword pavilion? He Can was also a swordsman. He had been in the academy for a long time and knew the importance and difficulty of each dojo. Qin Hao's performance was unprecedented and probably would not be repeated in the future. Compared to Deacon Chui, Qin Hao's talent was simply immeasurable. To be able to be the sword attendant of such a peerless swordsman was definitely better than following Deacon Chui. I see. Qin Hao remembered. He did look like He Sun. He shook his head and said, Unfortunately, you're not qualified. After that, Qin Hao stepped into the air and disappeared from the sword pavilion. He might hold a grudge, but he would never deliberately belittle others. With He Can's talent, even being a sword attendant was not enough to travel with him. If it were Mu Zhan from Rikujinji, it would be possible. But He Can was not. You're indeed not qualified to be his sword attendant. Li Guangxing lowered his head and said to He Can. Then he flicked his Taoist dust and disappeared into the distance. Gradually, the crowd dispersed and figures left one after another. In the end, only He Can was left kneeling on the ground alone with a sorrowful face. He was the son of Crane Lord and also came from a divine path family. Was he not even qualified to be a sword attendant? He Can, I think you're not tough enough. It's hard to learn anything in the academy. Why don't you go back to your father? In the distance, an elder in the deacon's robe of the academy said, Deacon Chui, I go. The academy is not suitable for a swordsman like you. Deacon Chui turned and left indifferently. Chapter 2077. The blind sword venerable sat on the Su sword peak. The peak reached into the clouds, overlooking everything. His will spread out, and the infinite divine domain could be seen at a glance. Not long after, a sword light pierced through the clouds and turned into a figure that landed beside the blind sword. Qin Hao looked at the cloth covering his eyes and asked, Teacher, can you see? My sword will can see, the blind sword venerable replied calmly. Blind sword answered calmly. Qin Hao smiled and sat down beside blind sword. Through the rolling sea of clouds, he looked down at the vast Avicii divine domain. Why don't you regain your sight? The celestial wheel cultivators lived as long as the heavens. Their Tao was indestructible, and their divine spirit was indestructible. The blind sword's Tao was profound and he was the elder brother of the Realm Lord. If he wanted to, he could reopen his eyes. Because the naked eye is not suitable for my Tao. The blind sword faced Qin Hao and felt the surging will flowing in his body. The aura he slowly emitted seemed to melt into the Su sword peak and become one with it. He nodded and said, Your celestial wheel has gradually adapted and begun to control the divine will of space. You are about to condense the second divine power, right? The blind sword could clearly sense everything that had happened in the sword waterfall, the sword inquiry pagoda, and the sword pavilion. In particular, Qin Hao had caused 19 echoes in the sword pavilion. He had used the powerful divine will of space to forcibly separate the sword will of the sword pavilion. To be able to do this proved that he had complete control of the power of space. "I can't hide anything from you, teacher," Qin Hao smiled and admitted, "but I don't understand how the essence of the celestial wheel divine will is different. Or rather, which kind of power in the world deserves to be called the strongest from the root? If other people ask this question, I can give them a clear answer. You are different. Every divine will in the world is the strongest to you." The blind sword stared at Qin Hao's face. It was as if two sharp lights shot out from the black cloth covering his eyes and pierced into Qin Hao's spiritual soul, prying into his situation clearly. Qin Hao felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. He felt that in front of his teacher there were no secrets to speak of. In an instant, Qin Hao thought that perhaps his teacher had already noticed that his heavenly wheel was different from others. It was a complete heavenly wheel of the Great Path. Since Blind Sword could see through it, Divine Lord Avicii, Sword Venerable Gu, and the other elders could naturally see through his concealment. But the Academy was the Academy, and they wouldn't ask too much. When divine power fuses into your celestial wheel, no matter what kind of power it is, it will be able to unleash its full potential. However, if we have to talk about the strongest, I think the one that you are most used to and most familiar with is the one that suits you the most. Blind Sword gave his opinion. He understood the confusion in Qin Hao's heart. The complete heavenly wheel contained the power of all things and formed its own universe. If too much divine power was fused into it, it would inevitably cause people to wonder which kind of divine power was best used. In fact, Qin Hao could do the best in every one of them. He was not like Li Guangxing and Loi. Tianluan was the most sensitive to sword intent. If he threw away sword intent, other divine powers would not be able to blend in. Disciple understands. Qin Hao stood up and bowed solemnly to Blind Sword. Then, he bowed slightly to the Academy. Go. Your talent is destined to be extraordinary in the future. The seamless sword realm is just a scenery that you pass by. In the future, don't doubt yourself. Your Tao is the complete Tao, the strongest Tao. Blind Sword revealed a comforting smile. People like Qin Hao could not be limited to one world. His future would be bright in the whole untainted land, and he would be worshipped and trembled by the people. The Blind Sword felt lucky to be able to guide him on his life path. After all, when Qin Hao stepped onto the peak of the wilderness, looking back at this blind man and the entire Seamless Academy, they were insignificant. Qin Hao left Su Sword Peak. Blind Sword's words had opened his heart and strengthened his resolve. In the following days, everything was peaceful in the Academy. Everyone was busy with cultivation. Qin Hao wanted to take Wuk to the ancient void dreamland in the West capital, but Severing Love told them there was no need. The ancient void dreamland was derived from the divine will of the Sword God King. Everything inside had been integrated into Divine Lord Avicii's body long ago, and then he established the Academy. The Sword Dao collection and dojo in the Academy were actually copies of the essence of the ancient void dreamland. Since Qin Hao and the rest had become disciples of the Academy, they could read the books at any time and use the dojo to train. There was no need for them to go to the ancient void dreamland. The opening of the ancient void dreamland was to make up for the talents who did not become disciples of the Academy at the Sword Discourse Field. Only there would be real gains. Qin Hao and the rest would be meaningless. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed. Qin Hao and Wuk had been cultivating in the Academy. They had made great progress. Wuk had improved in the Sword Dao, while Qin Hao had improved as a whole. On this day, a strange phenomenon suddenly appeared on the Su Sword Peak. The wind and clouds were strange, and divine light shot into the sky. A figure stood high in the sky, greedily absorbing the essence of the realm. This kid is making rapid progress. Yes, he has only been in the academy for 4 years, and he is already condensing the second divine power of the heavenly wheel. According to Blind Sword, this kid has only been a god for 300 years. His potential is terrifying. Vigorous figures stood side by side on the sword peak. Sword Lord Gu and the other 6 doyens looked at the sky at the same time, watching the power of the great path enter Qin Hao's body bit by bit. The light became brighter and brighter. It was not only the sword will, but also the divine will of the space of the entire realm. It kept surging, nourishing his divine body and merging into his spiritual soul. It's going to happen. Dan Qing secretly clenched his fist. The disciples in every corner of the academy looked in the direction of the Su Sword Peak. At this time, with a loud roar that shook the world, an extremely strong pressure of space suddenly swept out from the sky, crazily covering the academy. Everyone vaguely felt that the heavenly path was sinking, and the entire realm seemed to be collapsing. It was going to bury them and seal them in a dead silence. Boom! The divine splendor that whizzed out of Qin Hao's body disappeared. The strange wind and clouds were broken by a ray of light, revealing the clear sky. He clenched his fist lightly, and thick white particles overflowed from his palm. These white particles filled every part of his body, in his flesh, meridians, blood, and even his will and spiritual soul. They turned into a large net that connected to his limbs and bones. At this moment, he felt that the entire space of the infinite divine domain existed within his divine consciousness. After the Red Lotus divine power, today he had condensed the second divine power, space. Congratulations! Congratulations, junior brother! Junior 3. Before I met you, I always thought that I was a genius. After meeting you, why do I feel like an ordinary person? Li Guangxing's face was full of helplessness. Congratulations, Li Chuji. Loi stepped forward and looked at Qin Hao, who was covered in white particles. A ray of fighting spirit appeared in her eyes, but it quickly dimmed. In the past, she could not do anything to Qin Hao. Now that Qin Hao controlled the divine power of space and basically ignored the power of the realm, what could she do to him? When? That was not very realistic. Now Loi was considering whether she could withstand a few moves from Qin Hao. She sadly found that Li Guangxing was not the only one who had been reduced to an ordinary person. Even she, who stood in front of Qin Hao, was reduced to an ordinary person. Qin Hao smiled at the crowd, and his gaze shifted to Loi. Why, do you still want to try with me? Forget it, I may not be able to defeat you, Loi said. Ha! Dan Qing and the other disciples of the academy laughed. Loi was fierce. Usually they were bullied by Loi. Now, facing Qin Hao, the princess of the Divine Master was at her wits' end. Why don't I see Wuk? Qin Hao looked around. Wuk was not present. Qin Hao had to find a chance to teach him a lesson so that he would not be too proud of his swordsmanship. Don't blame him. He is in seclusion. I won't let him out. Sword Elder Severing Love's laughter came from the Su Jianfeng. Qin Hao stepped out of the void and bowed slightly to the 6 elders. He asked Severing Love, "Is he going to forge the heavenly wheel?" Severing Love smiled and nodded. Haha, after so long, that kid has finally forged the heavenly wheel. Qin Hao was overjoyed. He asked the elders, "When the time comes, I hope that the elders will lend a hand." The difference between forging the heavenly wheel on his own and the sword god's power of the great Tao was huge. Back then, Qin Hao had no choice. He was the first god in the divine wilderness. Now that the elders were willing to help, Wuk's heavenly wheel would be even stronger. If the Divine Master was willing to channel the power of the great world into Wuk's sword will, it would naturally be better. I will act according to the circumstances. Severing Love gave Qin Hao a reassuring look. After all, Wuk cultivated under him and was his disciple in name. Thank you, elders. Qin Hao was relieved. This way, Wuk had a higher chance of forging a complete heavenly wheel like him. 3rd year of the Lunar New Year. You have cultivated in the academy for a while. It's time to go out and take a look. Coincidentally, the Divine Master has a mission for you. Sword Sovereign Gu said. Mission? Qin Hao's expression turned serious. Yes, go to the Supreme Tower. Wu Jian is waiting for you. Sword Sovereign Gu pointed at Loi and Li Guangxing. The 3 of them would go together. Wuk's cultivation is too low and he is in seclusion to break through the heavenly wheel. He will not go with you, Sword Sovereign Severing Love said. Let's go to the Supreme Tower. As Li Guangxing's voice faded, he and Qin Hao turned into sword light and left the Su Sword Peak. After arriving at the Supreme Tower, Divine Master Wu Jian was waiting for them. Tianyang Kenshin was also there. Senior Divine Master, Senior Tianyang. The few of them said. Tianyang's seniority was low. Although he was an elder and took care of the academy's affairs, he was also a disciple and cultivated under Wu Jian. Yes. Sword God Wu Jian nodded. He felt the space divine will overflowing from Qin Hao. His eyes were filled with admiration. He said to Tianyang, Tell them. Is it a big deal? Li Guangxing felt that something was not right. After all, the academy had asked the 3 of them to join forces. Moreover, their strength was already in the upper echelon among the disciples. Unless they used their cultivation to suppress them, ordinary disciples would not be a match for them. It's not a big deal, but it's not small either. Tianyang pointed his finger in front of them. A huge starry sky map appeared in front of them. In the map, there were 3 divine swords crossing each other. It was especially eye-catching. Everyone stared at the map and understood that it was a map of the sword realm of the Great Path. Here, Tianyang Kenshin pointed to a position in the map. At the border where the 3 realms meet, there is a terrible turbulence, causing the stars to be displaced. If it is not controlled, many planes of the sword realm of the Great Path will be sucked into it. What is the reason? Qin Hao asked. Tianyang shook his head. I'm not sure, but my foster father sensed the power of a broken world from there. He guessed that a fragment of the main world had crashed into the sword realm of the Great Path. The specific reason is unknown. This is why I called you here. Let's go and take a look. A fragment of the main world. The 3 of them looked at Divine Master Wu Jian in surprise. There is indeed a remnant power of the main world surging into the sword realm. This trip may be dangerous. I will send swordsman Severing Love to take you there. In addition, God Lu and Dragon Master will also send people. When the time comes, the people of the 3 sword realms will investigate at the same time. Divine Master Wu Jian reminded them, Do not be careless. Qin Hao and the other 2 shuddered. Chapter 2078. Floating glass was located at the intersection of the 3 great sword realms. It was a plane at the very edge, and was not under the jurisdiction of the 3 realms, but there were traces of the 3 realms everywhere. The floating glass continent's location was rather special. As the primordial chaos surged towards the great Tao sword realm, it bore the brunt of the terrifying power that twisted the stars and was in an extremely precarious situation. At this moment, the ruler of the Floating Glass Palace, Divine Lord Floating Glass, stood in front of the palace and looked at the sky. At the end of the boundless void, a gray ball of chi could be vaguely seen in the depths of the clouds. It was like a huge millstone that contained extremely violent power. Could smash down at any time and destroy the entire floating glass realm. Divine Lord, what is that? A young girl standing behind Divine Lord Floating Glass stared with a shocked expression. A plane fragment. Divine Lord Floating Glass said. A plane fragment? The young girl's heart trembled violently as she muttered to herself. Yes. Divine Lord Floating Glass nodded with his hands behind his back. Because the power controlled by the Divine Tao was too strong, a battle between the Divine Tao had broken the Heavenly Tao and destroyed all life in a world. There were countless remains of continents in the primordial chaos. Some of the remains were very weak, like Floating Glass, but there were some planes that were destroyed, but the remnant power of the Heavenly Tao's collapse was still very strong, such as a master realm. From the looks of it, the gray ball of Qi that had entered the Sword Realm was most likely a fragment of a master realm. It contained the Tao of a fallen Divine Lord. With Divine Lord Floating Glass's strength, he could not shake it at all. Then what should we do? The young girl's face was filled with worry. I have already reported this matter to the 3 Divine Lords. I believe they will send experts over soon. The only thing Divine Lord Floating Glass could do was to guard. The 3 Divine Lords had used Floating Glass to demarcate the boundary, showing that they did not belong to any sword realm. However, if something really happened here, none of them would stand by and do nothing. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 streams of dazzling sword flows pierced through the void from different locations, heading straight for the Floating Glass Divine Palace at an extremely fast speed. They are here. Divine Lord Floating Glass thought to himself as he walked down the stone steps and prepared to welcome them. Very quickly, the 3 streams of swords in the sky descended on the training ground. As if they had agreed beforehand, they descended at the same time and turned into 3 groups with extraordinary auras. The young girl looked over in a daze. The 3 groups were all suffused with a strong divine light. The group on the left was tall and strong, and they wore mighty armor. All of them looked strong and sturdy, and the aura of the dragon might contained within their armor gave people an extremely reliable sense of security. The team in the middle appeared to be more elegant, but these sword cultivators had a very sharp aura. The team slightly to the right was rather easygoing, and imperceptibly gave others a feeling of intimacy. But the young girl wouldn't look down on them in the slightest, because this team was similarly formed entirely from Supreme Tao elites. Prince Long Tian, Divine General Qin, Sword God Severing Love looked at the other 2 groups and smiled. Sword God Severing Love, how have you been? The leader of the True Dragon Divine Clan, Wu Li, was a middle-aged man with the strongest physique. Long Tian, the eldest prince of the True Dragon Realm, had an immortal-grade heavenly wheel with 6 patterns. He was the most powerful prince under the Dragon Lord and the eldest brother of Long Miao. Sword Elder Severing Love, how is Divine Lord Avicii? I heard that a few years ago, the Academy held a grand sword competition. Rikugenji's team was led by a resolute Divine General. Jianshan wasn't the strongest Divine General under God Lu, but he was the most loyal one. Jianshan had a saint-grade heavenly wheel with 6 patterns. His relationship with God Lu was comparable to that of Divine Lord Avicii and Daisakong. Thank you for your concern, Divine General Qin. Everything is fine in the Seamless Academy. Today I have brought 3 juniors who won the sword competition. Sword God Severing Love pointed at Qin Hao and the others behind him. It's you. A surprised voice came from behind Jianshan. In the Rikugenji team, Mubai, the young master of the Mu clan, looked at Qin Hao with surprise. Oh, it's the young master of the Mu clan. Mubai, long time no see. Qin Hao didn't expect to meet Mu Zhan here. He subconsciously glanced at Mu Zhan, who was standing beside Mubai. Mu Zhan's strength was even stronger now. Speckles of divine intent surrounded his body. It was obvious that he had forged the sky wheel faster than the flawless ascension stage. Why? Do you know him? Jianshan asked Mubai. We've met once before, Yizichan replied. Mubai's tone was flat. He didn't like Qin Hao and felt uncomfortable when he saw him. 3rd year, you fought with young Master Mu? Li Guangxing secretly transmitted his voice and felt a little strange. It was a little unpleasant, but it's all in the past. Qin Hao replied. The trip to Zhongzhou City indeed made him unhappy. There was a moment of silence. People with discerning eyes could see that there seemed to be some unpleasantness between Qin Hao and Mubai. The gray airflow contains extremely strong divine will. If it falls, the floating glass will definitely not be able to withstand it. Jianchen, severing love, what do you think? Long Tian's face was serious. He raised his arm and pointed to the sky. He didn't have the leisure to care about the private affairs of the academy disciples and the young master of the Mu clan. Indeed, even Zhan Qing's soul began to palpitate intensely when he sensed the pressure in the air. Let alone the floating glaze continent, once the turbulence entered, it was likely that several planes around the three realms would be destroyed in an instant. He couldn't let that happen. When did Supreme God Floating Glass appear? Jianchen asked in an interrogative tone. Divine General Hui Chen, I don't know. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air. A few days ago, it came to the other side of the floating glass. At first, the pressure it contained was not strong, but it seems that he doesn't know at all. It's useless to ask. Let's go and see for ourselves. Long Tian interrupted Supreme God Floating Glass, his eyes surging with great confidence. Okay. Severing Emotions nodded. The reason he had brought his disciples here was to investigate the turbulence. According to Empyrean Divine Lord Avicii's senses, the turbulence was extremely unusual and there seemed to be something formidable there. If possible, he hoped that they could bring back the academy. Not only Divine Lord Avicii, he believed that God Lu and Dragon Master had also sensed it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have invited the top swordsmen of the three realms to explore at the same time. Let's go. Jianchen gave Mubai a look. Suddenly, the divine light on the Rikujinji cultivator's body soared into the sky, turning into a huge beam of sword light that pierced into the sky, directly rushing into the gray turbulence. Long Tian wasn't slow either. With a deafening dragon roar, a divine dragon phantom rose up and caught up with Jianchen with the true Dragon Clan team. Go in later. Don't go too far away from me. Severing Love reminded his disciples. In addition to Qin Hao and the other two, there were also a few disciples of the academy on this trip. Okay. Qin Hao and Li Guangxing nodded. Then, a sword sound soared into the sky. Severing Love's divine will wrapped everyone up and walked side by side with Long Tian and Jianchen. The three surging lights disappeared into the void, sinking into the terrifying gray turbulence. Master, can they resolve the crisis of the broken world for me? The girl asked. I don't know. Supreme God Floating Glass sighed. He hopes so. If Prince Long Tian, Divine General Chen, and Sword Elder Severing Love couldn't resolve the disaster above Floating Glass, only the three divine masters of the three great sword realms could do it. The divine will power here is so strange. The light pierced through the void and descended into the gray turbulence. Mubai blocked with one hand above his head. Astral winds were raging everywhere, and the surging force hit his body. Even he couldn't stand firmly. It's really a fragment of a continent. Beside Long Tian, the second prince Long Zhu said in disbelief. Looking around, it was a barren wasteland with collapsed ruins everywhere. Generally speaking, ordinary fragments of continents couldn't get close to the Great Path Sword Realm because they would be attacked by the realm power of the three sword realms. Before they could get close, they would be crushed into powder. But this continent didn't just resist the power of the three realms, it could even barge in. This is the core of a main realm. I can feel a wisp of remnant will left behind by a divine master. Jianchen's expression was very serious. As God Lu's personal guard, he was completely certain now that he was stepping on the ruins. This place is huge. How do we find the source? A Rikujinji cultivator asked. Sand and stones were flying in front of him, and the ground under his feet was constantly cracking. They couldn't see the end of the ruins with their naked eyes. Being trapped by the remnant will of a divine master, their psyche power and perception were rapidly weakening. They were like ordinary cultivators who had barged into a god's realm. We can only search separately. Don't be too far away from each other. If something unexpected happens, immediately warn us with your sword intent. Severing Love said to Long Tian and Jianchen. The three of them had the highest cultivation here, and the remnant will of the broken world couldn't suppress them. The others were more severely affected. The lower their cultivation, the more restricted they were. Okay. Long Tian and Jianchen nodded. The Divine Master had sent them here for two reasons. First, to understand the situation and eliminate any hidden dangers. Second, wasn't it to search for treasures in the broken world? Naturally, it was better to separate. Let's go over there. Long Tian's dragon intent overflowed as he strode in a certain direction. Second Prince Long Zhu and the experts of the true dragon race all followed. Jianchen also led Mubai and the others in a certain direction. Junior 3, do you feel anything unusual? Sword God Severing Love didn't act immediately. Instead, he asked Qin Hao for his opinion. Loi, Li Guangxing, Dan Qing, and the others couldn't help but reveal strange expressions. Why did Sword God Severing Love ask Qin Hao? Qin Hao closed his eyes and stood still. He carefully sensed for a moment. The white light particles on his body kept fusing into the gray space, and the outline of a map gradually appeared in his mind. It became clearer and clearer until his divine will of space was suppressed by the remnant will of the Divine Master and disintegrated in a place where his power couldn't reach. These ruins should have been very glorious in the past. The Divine Master's strength definitely belonged to the upper echelons, but he died in the realm war. Now, not only does the ruins contain his remnant will, but there is also a wisp of weak realm power of the great Tao. If we forcefully twist and destroy it, besides Senior Severing Love, none of us will be able to leave here alive. Qin Hao spat out a serious warning. He used the power of the original realm to infiltrate and could vaguely estimate the strength of the master of this divine world from the remnant will of the ruins. It was probably not inferior to Sword God Avicii. In the face of such a terrifying power, even if it was just the remnant will and a wisp of weak realm power, it was enough to crush this group of weak disciples into dust. So strong? Loi was shocked. You can try if you don't believe me. Qin Hao wasn't joking. Junior sister, don't be rash. Li Guangxing understood Qin Hao's temperament. It seems like martial arts are forbidden here. Severing Love revealed a pensive expression. Qin Hao nodded. It's best not to use too much divine power. If we simply investigate, there shouldn't be any danger. The remnant will in the broken world was very special. Qin Hao couldn't sense any specific destructive power, but he felt that it was very dangerous. It should be a very rare divine Tao attribute in the elemental wilderness. Alright, then in your opinion, where should we investigate first? Severing Love continued to ask. This made his junior brothers a little confused. Wasn't the leader this time the Doyen? Qin Hao raised his eyes and looked in the direction that Long Tian had left. If he had to choose before, he would have also chosen that direction. The remnant will surging from that direction was the strongest. However, since the true dragon tribe had gone, the Seamless Academy couldn't interfere. Let's go there. Qin Hao pointed in a direction. If my senses are correct, we should be able to find something special. Chapter 2079. Not a single blade of grass grew on the broken mountains. As the wind blew, sand and dust filled the air. The dried riverbed was filled with piles of white bones. Tens of thousands of skeletons were twisted and deformed. None of them were complete. It was as if they were telling a silent tragedy. Qin Hao and the others flew in the air against the violent astral winds. The gravel that had been soaked in blood after the war was abnormally hard. It was especially painful when it blew on their faces. After a period of time, they arrived at a dojo surrounded by barren mountains. Looking at the scale, this is also a powerful orthodoxy. Sword God Severing Love looked at the many collapsed divine halls around the dojo. From the ruins, he could vaguely see how glorious it was in the past. It's here. Qin Hao was not interested in the past of the ruins. After he landed, he walked to the center of the rubble and waved his finger. With him as the center, divine light swept past. Everything that came into contact with the broken walls turned into dust. In the end, a faint ball of light flickered and emerged from the dust. What is this? Loi and the rest were curious. They all went forward. Qin Hao stretched out his hand and bent down to pick up the item. Looking at the item in his hand, he could not help but frown. A teapot. The teapot was already damaged. The spout was broken. The ceramic body was covered with deep scratches. The patterns drawn on it had all disappeared. However, it was not completely broken. There was still a shocking divine will flowing inside. This is the special item that junior brother mentioned? Danqing and the rest were speechless. They thought they would find a divine treasure, but it was a useless teapot. Qin Hao's face was slightly embarrassed. He did feel a strong divine will flowing here, but he did not expect to find a teapot used for tea. No matter what, it is an extraordinary item. Sword God Severing Love took the teapot from Qin Hao's hand and examined it. He found that the divine will contained in this item was extremely vigorous. Its owner's cultivation was not below his. No matter how ordinary a daily item used by a strong warrior of the divine path was, it would be a supreme treasure in the mortal world. Countless people died because of greed. After that, he returned the teapot to Qin Hao. Since it was found by Qin Hao, it naturally belonged to him. Sword Elder is right, but it is useless in our hands. Danqing looked at the teapot in Qin Hao's hand and let out a strange laugh. Using a teapot as a divine soldier? What a joke. They were sword cultivators. Were they supposed to throw teapots at others when they fought? At least I've gotten something. At least I'll have something to report when I get back. Li Guangxing said. The owner of the teapot was also a weirdo. Of all things to nurture, he used divine power to nurture a teapot. There were all kinds of deities in the great desolate world. Senior Brother Guangxing's insight is especially unique. If the owner of the teapot was still here, you two would definitely become close friends with similar interests. This item is for you. Qin Hao laughed heartily and threw the teapot to him. This. Li Guangxing was speechless. Why did she give him this broken teapot? Congratulations, Senior Brother Guangxing. You have obtained a broken divine pot, Loi said. With this item in hand, Li Guangxing could return to the academy to practice the way of tea. Perhaps it wouldn't take long for him to become the god of tea. Ha! Danqing and the others laughed so hard that they couldn't close their mouths. It's the third day of the Lunar New Year. The origin of this fragment of a main realm shouldn't be simple. It will probably take some effort to find the source of power that pushed it. As one of the 6 founding elders of the academy, Severing Love had been to countless realms in his early years. He was also very knowledgeable. According to the shattered mountains and rivers beneath his feet, as well as the analysis of the various magnificent dojos, the strength of this main realm was not inferior to that of the infinite divine realm. It might even be superior. There were still remnants of the divine master's will, and the realm power hadn't completely dissipated. This proved that it hadn't been destroyed for long. What kind of power had destroyed this main realm? What was its purpose? It was worth pondering deeply behind this. Senior, what are you trying to say? Qin Hao asked. Perhaps we should retreat. Let Infinite, God Lu, and Dragon Master personally force the broken world out and make it stay away from the great Tao Sword realm. Sword Elder Severing Love said solemnly. Senior, are you worried about attracting disaster? Qin Hao had also thought of this. From the looks of it, The person who had destroyed a master realm to such an extent was extremely terrifying. Sword Elder, you are making a mountain out of a molehill. Loi didn't think so. There was no need to trouble her father. Since the powerhouse who destroyed the main realm allowed the fragments of the broken world to drift everywhere, it proved that the other party didn't care. Perhaps I am thinking too much, Severing Love said. Under the peaceful surface of the sword realm, there were hidden dangers in itself. He didn't want to get involved in other matters. Let's search first. If we can't find the source, we will let the Divine Master make the decision himself. Qin Hao was sure that the broken world contained some kind of enormous power. It might be an extremely powerful divine object. It would be a pity to just give it up. All right. Severing Love was thinking for the younger generation. If they found some useful treasures, it would be a good thing. After leaving the ruins of the dojo, the academy team continued to move forward. Qin Hao relied on the power of the original realm and secretly operated the perfect Tianluan in his body. His divine will spread out and tried to resonate with this broken world. If he wanted to find the divine treasure inside, he naturally had to understand it more. It just so happened that he had this ability. Junior brother's divine will aura seems to be particularly different from ours. On the way, Danqing and the others felt the power flowing in Qin Hao's body. Sword will and space will coexisted. It was indeed the aura of the infinite heavenly path. However, everyone could faintly feel that something was different. Qin Hao's divine will was more complete than theirs. It was like an independent entity that was born under the seamless heavenly Tao, yet it also formed its own universe. It was like a small world that was born in the great world, and it was an extension of Qin Hao's. How is it different? It is just a unique divine technique that can temporarily increase the strength of the Tianluan divine will. It makes people feel that it is boundless. Qin Hao's tone was calm. The disciples of the academy were indeed not comparable to the Tianluan outside the divine domain. Danqing and the others began to notice that he was different. Such a divine technique is quite amazing. An old disciple was very envious. The academy also has divine techniques to increase the sword will. You can only blame yourselves for not having enough divine power and not working hard. Now you are envious of a third-year junior. Severing Love reprimanded and changed the topic. Sword Elder is right. Several disciples were embarrassed. It seems that we are still not strong enough. We can't even withstand the turbulence of an ownerless broken world. The further Danqing went, the stronger the wind of gravel swept. Flying in the air began to become difficult. Be careful. Li Guangxing suddenly swung the dust of Taoist in his hand, sweeping out a ray of sword brilliance that flew straight to a cliff abyss on the ground. There, a distorted shadow screamed in horror. As soon as its head popped out, Li Guangxing's sword will pierced through its skull. The shadow immediately collapsed. A remnant soul. Danqing's palms were sweating. In this broken world, there was a remnant soul that had not been eliminated. If it got into the soul aperture, the consequences would be unimaginable. Release the Tianluan and be alert. Sword Elder Severing Love ordered in a deep voice. From the barren mountains ahead, he felt the existence of more remnant souls, among which there was no lack of divine wills with strong resentment. Let's think of a way to avoid it. Senior brothers, stay close together. The two of us will go first. Li Guangxing said, but did not get a response from Qin Hao. Li Chuji. Loi looked to her side and suddenly found that Qin Hao had disappeared. Boom, boom, boom. In front of them, broken mountains rose up and were shattered by the wind that swept through the space. In the sky full of dust, strange shadows howled and shuttled back and forth. They were densely packed as if an army had drowned the road ahead. Among the countless remnant souls, Severing Love suddenly found a majestic figure in broken armor. He was like a divine general who commanded the army. Where the spear pointed, A terrifying divine light pierced through heaven and earth and blasted toward the Academy team. Yes, senior brothers, you should put more effort into improving your divine power of sword principle. The divine method that I practice may not be suitable for you. As Qin Hao was joking around, the surroundings were deathly silent. Shockingly, the sword elder and his fellow disciples were nowhere to be seen in the dust. Qin Hao suddenly woke up and felt that something was wrong. The white particles on his body rolled and merged into the space. He wiped his fingers in front of his eyes, and immediately, flaming patterns appeared on his eyes. His pupils emitted a deep fire. Where is this? Qin Hao could vaguely see an area of 100 miles. However, under the divine will of space, he could not see Severing Love and the others within a radius of a few 100 miles. The environment was completely different from the place just now. He had been separated from the Academy team. What happened just now? Thinking carefully, every detail appeared in his mind. He remembered that Danqing asked him about the uniqueness of his divine will. Then, it seemed that Li Guangxing suddenly released a sword will. After that, he could not remember anything. It's definitely not amnesia. Qin Hao looked down at his clothes. There was a faint aura of will of Wei left on it. Was the space forcibly distorted by someone to deliberately separate him from the Academy team? In this broken world, other than the Academy, there is only Rikujinji, Jianchen, and Long Tian from the Dragon Clan. Could it be done by Divine General Chen and Long Tian? Jianchen and Long Tian's cultivation were very high. At present, Qin Hao was far from their level. However, neither Rikujinji nor the Dragon Clan were proficient in spatial will of Tao. Moreover, there was no reason for them to deliberately separate him from the Academy team. After all, the other party had the extraordinary strength to directly contend with Severing Love. As for Sword Elder, Severing Love would not harm Qin Hao. Thinking of this, Qin Hao felt a chill in his heart. They were not the only ones in this broken world. Besides Jianchen and Long Tian, there was also Tianluan, whose realm had been destroyed. Qin Hao remembered very clearly that before they were separated, Li Guangxing had struck out with his sword. Who was he trying to kill? Taking a deep breath, a faint taste of dust appeared in his dry mouth. Qin Hao was also a person who had experienced several great calamities and life and death. The 4 reincarnations had made him more tenacious than ordinary Tianluan, so he did not panic. Since it was not Jianchen and Long Tian, then the only explanation was that there might be an old demon in this destroyed broken world. Perhaps there was more than one demon. It was them who had distorted the space between Qin Hao and the Academy team. I have rashly intruded. If I have disturbed any of the seniors, I apologize to you here. Qin Hao bowed deeply towards the dusky void and said, Senior, if you have any requests or unfulfilled wishes, please show yourself. This junior will do his best to fulfill them. His voice was not loud, but it contained the divine will of space. His words spread invisibly towards the gray void. He believed that the other party must have heard him. What are you talking about? Are you crazy? Suddenly, a voice came from behind. Qin Hao could not help but be shocked. He turned around and saw a white robe floating in the air, staring at him with a puzzled expression. Young Master Mu. Qin Hao was surprised. Why did Mu Bai of Rikujinji suddenly appear in front of him? Chapter 2080. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Chapter 2080. Invincible Scramble. Where is this place? Why did you suddenly appear in front of me? Mu Bai was also very surprised. He followed Jianchen to explore the broken world, and in the blink of an eye, the people around him mysteriously disappeared. Then, he met Qin Hao. It was simply baffling. He remembered that the Rikujinji team and the Seamless Academy's exploration direction were not the same. Wasn't it ridiculous for the two of them to meet? It seems like young Master Mu also had his space distorted by an external force. Qin Hao instantly understood. Mubai's experience was the same as his. What do you mean by distorted space? Mubai didn't understand. Who distorted space and separated him from Jianxin's side? Qin Hao shook his head. I'm not sure. Maybe we've been targeted by something in the broken world. Ha ha. Mubai was stunned for a moment before he laughed. He pointed at Qin Hao and said, "You're being overly suspicious. I won't deny what you said. Maybe we've been affected by some external force, but it's impossible to say that we've been targeted. Before this, 2 people in my team also mysteriously got separated. This kind of thing had happened before. Mubai didn't expect it to happen to him. He couldn't get used to it, but he didn't think it was possible to be targeted. Maybe I'm thinking too much." Qin Hao's taut heartstrings were slightly relieved. Since Mubai's team had encountered abnormalities before, and from his tone, the missing people didn't seem to be important, then everything might be a coincidence. There weren't any old monsters that survived in the broken world, so the space was probably unstable. "What's your next plan?" Mubai asked. He and Qin Hao were separated from the team and were isolated. "Let's travel together," Qin Hao said. "We'll explore together." The desolate broken world was filled with strangeness. There was a dangerous aura flowing under the undercurrent. Qin Hao couldn't figure out what kind of Tao intent it belonged to. Now, having one more person by his side meant one more source of strength and one more layer of security. If things really went south and they encountered an uncontrollable situation, they could even drag Mubai to fill the hole. Since the broken world sent a living person over, Qin Hao naturally wanted to let Mubai fully realize his value. "All right." Mubai's eyes flashed with a sly light, coinciding with Qin Hao's thoughts. "Let's go." When Qin Hao saw the expression on Mubai's face, he knew that this fellow was not someone easy to deal with. He most likely wanted to keep Qin Hao by his side as a scapegoat. But Qin Hao didn't care. He just wanted to see who was more capable. He was confident that he would not be the first to die. Both of them surged with divine splendor at the same time and flew towards the sand in front of them. Both of them sympathized with each other and sympathized with each other's encounter. What a coincidence! I've met young Master Mu several times. "It's fate," Qin Hao said. "Yes, it's fate." Mubai's voice came from behind. "This broken world is full of unknowns. If something bad happens to us, I'll try my best to hold them back. I hope that after young Master Mu is out of danger, you can make a trip to the academy and tell the elders about me." Qin Hao sighed as if he had predicted something. He actually told Mubai about his will. "Young Master Mu, don't be sad. For the peace of the sword world, sacrifices are inevitable. Young Master Mu comes from a great clan in Rikujinji. You have a heavy responsibility on your shoulders and cannot afford to lose. I'm different from you. I'm all alone and have no worries. If I don't go to hell, who will?" Qin Hao sighed. He believed that Mubai would understand. "Young Master Mu, can you agree to my request?" Qin Hao's tone was heavy and helpless. "Young Master Mu." "Mubai." Qin Hao felt that something was wrong. He suddenly turned around and shouted at the void. Mubai was no longer in front of him. He disappeared again. Qin Hao was stunned. He rarely had a heart-to-heart talk with people, especially with people he was not familiar with. In the end, he spoke from the bottom of his heart to the air. This Mubai really didn't keep his word. He disappeared just like that. I was prepared to let him realize the value of life. What a pity. Qin Hao shook his head. He stepped into the void and a layer of ripples appeared under his feet. His body disappeared into the raging sand like a sword light. He didn't know how long he had traveled. The momentum of the strong wind surging in the space weakened. The sand that was randomly sweeping around was also not as strong as before. His vision gradually became clearer and the range of his telekinesis became much wider. At this moment, Qin Hao stood in the air against the wind. Below his feet was an endless pit. It was very, very deep. In the depths of the ground, there were gullies that looked like centipedes. The area was very vast. This used to be a sea. Qin Hao found it hard to imagine what kind of Tao will bombardment could evaporate the endless sea that was strengthened by the power of the realm. Stone pillars that were riddled with holes stood in the pitch-black pit. To be precise, they used to be immortal islands and huge mountains in the sea. Qin Hao's telekinesis shrouded the place. His figure weaved through the ruins of the sea. The further he went, the clearer the scenery of this world became. The quieter the environment was, but the stronger the hidden dangerous aura was. At this moment, strings of ancient purple-gold runes revolved and flowed in Qin Hao's mind. They gradually condensed into the image of a pocket-sized cauldron. It was constantly vibrating with sound waves that were transmitted to his divine soul. Not only that, the storage ring on his hand was flickering with brilliance. The exalted god cauldron in it was also activated. It was releasing some kind of signal to Qin Hao. The two divine objects seemed to be telling him not to go any further. This area is quiet and deep. It is like a tomb that has buried the strong wind and sand outside. It was like a secluded harbor in the howling wind. However, the smell of blood here was even stronger. Qin Hao knew that it was very dangerous ahead. Perhaps the source of the power that was pushing the broken world towards the sword world was here. However, that dangerous aura had an indescribable attraction that kept luring Qin Hao forward. It made him want to see what it was exactly. The number of stone pillars in the ruins of the sea was decreasing. The area that he could see was getting bigger. Many islands that were pierced by the divine power were actually floating in the sky. They became floating islands that were on the verge of collapse. Rocks were constantly falling off as if they would fall down at any time. Closer, even closer. A weak light was refracted through the gaps of the floating islands and was reflected in Qin Hao's eyes. The flame patterns on his eye chakra flowed slowly. On the entrance of a huge mountain, the light that was on the verge of collapse was emitting a hazy halo. It was like a severely injured person that was waiting to be rescued. What is that? Qin Hao ran with the divine step. His body was shuttling crazily between the floating islands that were pierced through. He tried his best to get closer to the source of the light. Gradually, he could see it clearly. On the top of the huge mountain, a mirror was floating above the entrance of the mountain. It was rotating slowly and refracting rays of light. The divine aura that it emitted was extremely shocking. A divine object from the broken world? Qin Hao was completely sure that it was an extraordinary divine tool. Its power was definitely not comparable to ordinary divine objects. The feeling that it gave Qin Hao was that it was even stronger than the Great Void Divine Cauldron and the Exalted God Cauldron. Li Chuji, it's you again? Just as Qin Hao was getting closer and closer to the mountain, a white robe flew over and blocked his path. Young Master Mu? Qin Hao stopped and saw Mubai holding a broken shield that looked like a tortoise shell. His aura was fluctuating violently, and he looked extremely impatient. Thinking about it, Mubai was accidentally teleported to Qin Hao when he was distorted in the wrong space. The two of them did not even exchange a few words before he was teleported away. Unfortunately, he appeared at the wrong time. Seems like young Master Mu is quite lucky to have obtained an extraordinary item. Qin Hao looked at the shield that Mubai was holding. Although it was broken, the pressure that it emitted was very strong. It's mine, Mubai said cautiously. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the shield. In order to obtain this item, he had expended a lot of energy. No one is going to snatch it from you, Qin Hao said coldly. He stepped forward and flew directly to the top of the mountain. Stop! Mubai was also looking at the mountain. His sharp eyes stared at the light at the entrance of the mountain. He channeled divine power in his hands and pointed a sword at Qin Hao's back. It turned into a sword ray that pierced through the air and attacked. Bang! Qin Hao turned around and punched, causing Mubai's sword will to vanish. He said coldly, "What is the meaning of this, young Master Mu? Don't touch that item." Mubai gave a serious warning. He held the shield in his hand and walked toward the mountain. It was as if the divine item on the mountain was his. Qin Hao furrowed his brows slightly and took another step forward. His figure instantly overtook Mubai and rapidly approached the giant mountain. He was not allowed to touch it? Why? Didn't you hear me? Mubai shouted. He clenched one hand and a wheel of light swept out from his body. Suddenly, a glaring sword ray lit up an endless area. The terrifying sword will meandered along his wheel. His entire temperament changed drastically. He had turned into a god of swordsmanship. "Do you want to fight?" Qin Hao slowly turned around. His expression was especially cold. "For Lu Qiu's sake, I won't argue with you." Kunlun sees 7-sword mountain. Lu Qiu clearly had the ability to kill 7 with one sword. However, he unexpectedly stopped and gave the Sword Emperor's secret art to Wuk. Qin Hao remembered this favor. The Mu clan was under God Lu's command. Mubai and Lu Qiu called each other brothers. Naturally, their relationship was not shallow. Therefore, for Lu Qiu's sake, Qin Hao could forgive the sword in the back. But it was only second. Haha, what a joke. Why do I need you to give Lu Qiu face? Mubai glanced at the light at the top of the mountain and said, "The item in the broken world has no owner. It belongs to whoever gets it. Coincidentally, I also want to see the Academy's spatial sword will. Let me give you a piece of advice. It's best not to use the divine power of Tianluan here." Qin Hao warned. The broken world was very unstable. If there was a riot, it would be difficult for him to get out alive. Scared? Mubai revealed a confident smile and shouted, "Get out of the way." He was the young master of the Mu clan. The item in this broken world should be taken back by him. Li Chuji was a disciple of the Academy. What right did he have? It seems like you didn't take my warning to heart at all. Qin Hao's gaze landed on Mubai. White particles gathered in his palm and pressed down on Mubai's head. Whoosh! The huge palm pressed down. The divine will that contained the space Tao sealed everything and wanted to trap Mubai. The broken world was very unstable. He could not let this guy cause trouble. Chapter 2081 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Massacre Sword God. During their meeting in Zhongzhou City, Wuk had left a deep impression on Mubai. Even Mu Zhan was no match for him in terms of swordsmanship. It was rare to find someone like him in the 3 great sword realms. Once his laws were perfected and he created the Sky Wheel, his strength would increase and he would become even stronger. If it was Wuk standing in front of Mubai, he might have some reservations. Unfortunately, it was Qin Hao. From the strength of Qin Hao's will, it was much weaker than Wuk's. If that was all, how could Qin Hao compete with him for the divine item in the broken world? At this moment, Mubai held his sword and shield with both hands. His figure was like light, and he did not hide the contempt in his eyes. "Then come at me." Qin Hao had nothing to say. Since ancient times, treasures belonged to those who were capable. It was not his in the first place, and he had no right to ask Mubai to withdraw. Since that was the case, they would fight for it with their own abilities. White particles filled Qin Hao's body. Rumbling sounds came from where he was standing. Layers of divine ripples appeared in the space, containing a strange rhythm. He pinched his fingers together and drew mottled runes in front of him. The light intersected to form a complicated pattern. Streaks of white sword chi shot out from the pattern and pierced towards his opponent. You dare to fight me without using the sky wheel? How arrogant! Mubai sensed the strength of the sword chi and sneered. He shrunk his body under the shield and held it above his head. Suddenly, a mass of divine light burst out. Along with the sound of Puchi, the dense sword chi pierced the shield and dispersed. Just this? The spatial sword will of the Academy's disciple could not even break through the defense of a broken shield? No. Mubai sensed that the sword will that swept over did not disappear. It was an illusion. However, at this moment, the sword's splendor that had collapsed on the shield condensed once again. Divine swords that were suffused with white particles appeared in the surroundings, forming a circular sword formation that surrounded Mubai. Then, the divine swords glowed with dazzling light, and the sound of swords reverberated in the void. The will of Tao resonated with the space of the broken world, and a majestic force pressed down from above. Light screens rose in all directions like four walls, completely sealing him within. Stay here obediently, Qin Hao said expressionlessly. He turned around and walked towards the top of the mountain. He only needed to use the spatial sword will to trap Mubai. There was no need to kill him. Moreover, if they were to fight, the world energy of the broken world would become chaotic and Qin Hao would be in danger. Break! Mubai let out a thunderous roar. The divine power of Tianluan wriggled, and his entire body condensed into a torrential stream of swords. He rose into the air and pierced through the space, breaking free from the shackles. Bang! The four sword curtains immediately collapsed. You underestimate me. Mubai's expression flashed with shame. He was actually looked down upon by Qin Hao. How dare he? He swung the shield in his hand with all his might, and a black shadow streaked across the void. It grew bigger and bigger, like a dark cloud spreading. Its speed was incomparably fast. Boom! A floating island suddenly exploded under the radiation of Mubai's divine power. Rocks flew and crashed down. As the light of the shield crazily shrouded the second and third island, the crazy explosion shook the sky above the ocean ruins. The huge rocks covered the entire world like meteors. Qin Hao's divine will of space permeated the air as he faced the falling boulders head-on. The boulders continued to shatter above his head and around him, but they didn't affect him in the slightest as he continued moving forward. However, he had indeed underestimated Mubai's strength, especially the shield of the broken world in his hand. As the huge shadow shrouded over, it quickly covered the top of Qin Hao. Suddenly, a strong pressure came down, like a huge hand from the heavens slapping down on his body. Qin Hao's body suddenly sank, and he let out a muffled groan. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Brilliant flowing light intertwined under the shield. The pitch-black shield flickered with surging light, projecting a huge beast shadow. It was like a 10,000-year-old divine turtle lying in the sky, releasing rolling beast will. When the heavy pressure came down, mixed with the meteor-like sword chi, Qin Hao was completely submerged. Ding! Ding! Qin Hao raised his palms above his head, and the spatial divine will formed a white shield. The falling sword chi was destroyed on the shield. Mubai's holy heavenly wheel gave birth to two divine patterns. His cultivation was not too strong, and was still within Qin Hao's range. His sword will was not as monstrous as Lu Qiu's level, so there was nothing to be afraid of. The key was this shield. It gave Qin Hao a pressure that could not be underestimated. It suppressed him in a moment. Although he could still withstand it, he could not move. Stay here obediently. Mubai passed by Qin Hao. Seeing that he was unable to move due to the suppression of the shield, he let out a cold laugh. Then, he took a step forward and leisurely walked towards the huge mountain. Mubai did not know the exact origin of the shield, but he understood some things. This shield had the ability to condense a formation. As long as he poured his divine power into it, the shield would be able to evolve a special formation power according to the Tao intent that was poured in, and then release it again. For example, he had just poured in sword will, so when the shield pressed down on Qin Hao's head, it immediately formed a sword Tao formation. Under the suppression of the broken shield and the sword array, how could Li Chusan escape in such a short time? No way. This shield can form its own formation. Qin Hao looked up at the huge shadow above him as he resisted the falling sword qi. As a core member of the Divine Palace's 7 peaks, he naturally felt that the shield was different from the rest. Unfortunately, the Tao Lord Ruler was left in the divine wilderness and not with him. It was a arch weapon that Xiantian Peak had specially created to break formations. Even if it was not as good as the shield, it could still be used in his hands. Qin Hao saw that Mubai was getting closer and closer to the huge mountain, and he was trapped in the shield and sword array. He could not help but feel anxious. The divine item on the mountain pass was definitely not simple. At this moment, there was an ear-piercing scream in front of him. Qin Hao saw that Mubai seemed to be trying to dodge something in his panic, but he did not manage to. As a ray of light swept past, Mubai's figure disappeared into thin air. He's gone again. Qin Hao's eyes flashed with flame patterns. He saw very clearly that the light that swept past Mubai's figure was the mirror floating on top of the huge mountain. Could it be that he was unknowingly affected by the mirror light after being separated from the academy team? What exactly was that mirror that it could divide space? Qin Hao did not have time to think about it. He looked up and carefully scanned the shield with the 10,000 spirit fire eyes. Mubai was unlucky enough to be teleported away by the mirror light. He had to take this opportunity to break the formation. The power of the divine will is like a bottomless abyss. Even with my matrix Tao, I still can't see through its flaws. This is troublesome. The 10,000 spirit fire eyes was condensed by the original realm's heavenly Tao. It had the ability to see through the essence of the universe and see through the true and false will of the way. But if the opponent's cultivation was too strong, reaching a level far beyond Qin Hao's, his divine path would appear too weak. This would restrict him and cause the 10,000 spirit fire eyes to fail. Obviously, the shield above his head belonged to this kind of power. With Qin Hao's current cultivation, he was still unable to match it and could only be restrained. Mubai is a swordsman. His divine will contains sword Tao. Judging from this situation, the power of the broken shield should be derived from his divine will. Qin Hao had a guess in his mind. He needed to verify it. He held up one of his palms to the sky and maintained his defensive aura. His right finger suddenly pointed upwards and shot out a fierce white sword aura. This sword aura traversed through space and didn't collide with Mubai's sword intent. It passed through the layers of seals and quickly flew towards the bottom of the giant shadow and shook the broken shield. Buzz. When the sword qi that contained the spatial divine will came into contact with the broken shield and absorbed it, it quickly reacted. Strands of square lines lit up repeatedly. From afar it looked like a turtle's back. Then, within the sword formation that shot down, there was a large amount of spatial sword qi mixed with white particles. They were hidden in the space and were extremely fast. They crazily attacked the gang qi and shook Qin Hao's body a few times. A strange look appeared in Qin Hao's eyes, but he did not dare to be certain. Next, he activated the red lotus divine power and pointed at the sky again. A fiery red light pierced through the void and the divine will converged on the broken shield. In the next moment, the falling rain of swords gave birth to many flaming divine swords. It was a spectacular scene. Just as I thought. Qin Hao breathed a sigh of relief. His guess was right. This divine shield of the broken world was a formation derived from the user's divine power. It had a myriad of changes and was quite powerful. It was indeed a good treasure. The mistake was that Mubai did not seem to have completely refined the divine shield and recognized him as its master. So now, no matter what kind of Tao will it received, it would instinctively switch formations. It was a little difficult to break through you, but now it's easy. Qin Hao's divine path level was not as high as the broken shield. He did not understand Mubai's sword Tao, but the person he knew the most in this world was himself. Buzz. Monstrous divine light swept across the sky as if the Milky Way was flowing backward. Qin Hao opened the divine will of space. White particles filled everything, forming a turbulent will that crossed the space and fiercely hit the big shield above. Clang! With a heavy blow, thick white particles instantly appeared and gradually attached to the big shield. They wrapped around it and forcefully dispersed Mubai's remaining sword will. At this moment, the formation of the phantom of the black tortoise lying in the sky changed. The falling rain of swords all disappeared and dissolved in midair. Instead, a white light swept over and shone down on Qin Hao's head. As the white light shone on his body, Qin Hao dispersed the upstanding qi around his body and walked out of the suppression of the broken shield. So obedient. Young Master Mu heartlessly abandoned you. Why don't you follow me? If you don't say anything, then I'll take it that you agree. Qin Hao smiled as he came in front of the phantom of the black tortoise and reached out his hand. That belongs to young Master Mu. An angry shout rushed into his eardrums. The suffocating killing intent caused the temperature of the space to suddenly drop. Before Qin Hao's outstretched hand could grab the broken shield, a black sword light pierced his nose. Bang! Qin Hao's palm slapped on the sword light. Borrowing the recoil, he dodged the opponent's next attack. He looked at Mu Zhan in front of him, whose black hair was fluttering and whose eyes were flickering with a scarlet luster. He could not help but exclaim in surprise, "Immortal grade." Mu Zhan's sword will was filled with heavy killing intent. In the battle with Wuk in the central continent city, he lost by a small margin, defeated by one sword 7 kills. At this moment, the wheel light that surrounded Mu Zhan's body made people feel extremely cold. However, unlike Luo Yi who cultivated the frost divine will and was of the ice attribute, his cold was an extreme killing intent. Just like the flawless sword Tao, that killing intent seeped into his limbs and bones, and the wheel light almost covered his entire body. Mu Zhan entered the divine path and cast the immortal grade heavenly wheel. That belongs to young Master Mu. You can't take it away. Mu Zhan's eyes were emotionless. He held a black sword in his hand and stared coldly at Qin Hao. He had an extremely close relationship with Mubai. From the broken shield, he could feel traces of the other sword will, proving that Mubai had used it before. Chapter 2082. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. I didn't kill him. This shield is indeed an item from the broken world that young Master Mu found. We were together just now. To be honest, I put in a lot of effort to get this broken shield, but young Master Mu suddenly disappeared. I can't just leave the shield here, so I decided to keep it for him for the time being. I'll find a chance to return it to him when I get out. Mu Zhan's arrival disrupted Qin Hao's plan. Mu Zhan's slaughter sword will was pure and was not weaker than Wuk's sword doctrine. He had also forged the immortal grade heaven wheel, so Qin Hao had to be careful. Moreover, getting the mirror on the mountain was his primary goal. He didn't want to waste his energy on a broken shield and Mu Zhan. Mu Zhan was a person who valued loyalty. He was also loyal to Mubai. Although he had just ascended to the God realm, if he really fought, his power would not be weaker than Mubai's with 2 marks on the sacred heaven wheel. He could even detonate the broken world's realm force. At this moment, after Mu Zhan heard Qin Hao's explanation, his killing intent lessened a lot. There was still a trace of doubt in his red eyes. Was it really so? Why did he feel that something was wrong? Since you're here, you should keep the shield that young Master Mu found. Qin Hao gave Mu Zhan a don't worry look. He wouldn't snatch it. Then, he raised his head slightly. Qin Hao looked at the huge mountain in front of them and pointed at the top. I don't know what that shining thing is. A senior from the academy found it first. He wanted to go and take a look, but it suddenly disappeared. Since the shield is in your hands, I should go and take a look. Okay. Mu Zhan stood in the air, his body firmly blocking Mubai's broken shield. He glanced at the mountain pass and judged that the thing on the mountain was unusual. Since the treasure was found by the Academy's disciple, it should be taken by the Academy. Qin Hao was very suitable. Qin Hao smiled. The more he looked at Mu Zhan, the more he liked him. His admiration was indescribable. Mu Zhan's brain was just as rigid as wax. Could it be that this was a common characteristic of the sword doctrines? Mu Zhan, stop him. Right when Qin Hao moved, a vast sword qi madly charged over from afar, and a figure was wrapped within it. Shockingly, it was the young master of the Mu clan. Translation. Keeping the broken shield was a lie, and the discovery of the divine object on the mountain by the disciples of the Academy was probably also a lie. Translation on. Mu Zhan's celestial wheel revolved, releasing a strong black light and killing intent. As he raised his hand, strands of black sword aura flew in the air, piercing toward Qin Hao's back. What a hateful feeling! Qin Hao suddenly missed Wak. If that kid was here, he could completely trust him with his back. Turning around, Qin Hao formed a divine Tao seal with his palms. White particles rolled around his body. He pressed his finger down, and a boundless sword flew through the air. The sword aura that contained the great Tao of space collided with the killing aura. The black and white forces collided and exploded, creating a terrible vibration. Then, Qin Hao and Mu Zhan's figures appeared at the intersection of the Tao wills at the same time. Their palms collided and tangled together. Mubai was sweating profusely as he gasped for breath. He came to the side of the shield and was about to lift it up to help. However, he found that he couldn't lift it no matter how hard he tried. The shield seemed to be stuck in a ball of mud, as if it was imprisoned by a strong spatial force. He couldn't help but curse out loud. He greeted Qin Hao with filthy words. Ignoring his tired body and mind, he rushed over and slashed his sword. Whoosh! The sword aura slashed down sharply. Mubai's divine power roared and his celestial wheel was released to the limit. He had always been elegant and had never hated someone so much. He didn't care about the consequences of this attack. Qin Hao's palms moved together. Two divine powers surged in his body. The white space particles and the red lotus particles each occupied half of his body. Unknowingly, even his hair was dyed half white and half red. While imprisoning Mu Zhan's killing sword aura, he punched his right fist on the falling divine light. Bang! As the sword slashed down, the surging divine power of the sword impacted his body. Qin Hao, who was surrounded by two Rikujinji's celestial wheels, fell from the sky to the foot of the giant mountain. Mubai's celestial wheel was a little weak, but his cultivation was there. In the words of the Illusion Lord, his 20,000 years of eating was not for nothing. Without releasing his celestial wheel, Qin Hao took the two's attacks head-on and fell into a disadvantageous position. Li Chuji, I didn't want to argue with you, but you kept interfering. If I kill you today, there won't be anyone in the great Tao Sword realm to collect your corpse. Mubai's face was extremely cold. His eyes contained monstrous anger. Young Master Mu. Mu Zhan's heart sank. Was he really going to kill Li Chuji? Severing love is not here. What are you afraid of? Mubai roared at Mu Zhan. I'm not afraid, but, just listen to me. There's no need for so many buts. Kill. Mubai's decision was not to be doubted. He clasped his palms in the void below. Suddenly, two sharp lights condensed and turned into a huge sword light. It blasted towards the place where Qin Hao fell. After a moment of hesitation, Mu Zhan raised the black sword in his hand and also slashed. A black current, like a crescent sword slash, cut at the foot of the mountain. Dong! Almost as soon as Qin Hao's body came into contact with the mountain rock, he immediately climbed up again. Beams of golden light continuously erupted from the major acupoints all over his body. The surging divine power was like a river that had opened the floodgates. 9 streams of divine power revolved around him and condensed into one. A huge, illusory image of the battle god radiated outwards, causing the mountain to shake unceasingly as it enveloped him. In the next moment, Qin Hao's fist burst out. The majestic phantom of the battle god also blasted out a punch. The space and the red lotus fire became one. Red particles filled every space. Wherever the fist passed, the killing sword current and sword chi of Mubai burned and disintegrated. The violent power shattered the sword wills of both sides. At the same time, it also blasted fiercely on the bodies of Mubai and Mu Zhan. Poof! Wah! Mubai and Mu Zhan spat out a mouthful of blood. Their internal organs felt like they were being burned. They both retreated at the same time. How is this possible? Mubai looked at the phantom of the battle god in the void. His eyes were filled with shock. He was at the helm of the resurgence of the Mu clan. The Mu clan belonged to the direct line of God Lu. Therefore, he knew many secrets that outsiders didn't know. For example, the martial god who swept away many famous sword gods in the 3 great sword realms. You want to kill me? Qin Hao floated in the middle of the phantom of the battle god. His long hair fluttered gently. He looked like a demon and an immortal. His body was flowing with an overbearing spirit. The broken world was ownerless. Although it was said that only the capable could occupy it, he had never thought of killing Mubai. Even though they had fought twice, he had always held back. What he held back was not only the strength to destroy the other party, but also Lu Qiu's feelings. However, Mubai made a move and killed him without hesitation. He even threatened not to collect his corpse. Qin Hao asked. The majestic phantom of the battle god pressed a few steps forward, giving off a huge sense of oppression. You think you can do it? I will block him. Young Master Mu, you quickly go and retrieve the things on the mountain. There was no fear in Mu Zhan's eyes. The immortal level Tian Luan released a turbulent killing radiance. His body continued to elongate. He actually turned into a huge killing sword god and waved the sword in his hand at Qin Hao. Just a moment ago, when Mubai wanted to kill Qin Hao, he hesitated. Now that he felt that Qin Hao was in danger, he became the most determined one. He was determined to cover for Mubai. But you can't stop him alone. Let's work together to kill him. Mubai shouted hoarsely. He had heard of the martial god's fame and even learned some of the martial god's divine skills from Lu Qiu. He was very clear about how strong Qin Hao, who had formed the battle god Taoist physique, was. The storage ring on Mubai's hand lit up. A dark and gloomy sword will spread toward the void. It spread from here to the broken world. It was suppressed by the power of the realm. Although the spreading speed was very slow and getting weaker, this was the only way he could do. He hoped that Jianchen could arrive in time. At the same time, 3 divine swords that contained strong radiance flew out from the ring. They formed 3 directions to suppress the void and surrounded the battle god phantom in the center. These 3 swords were not his. They contained a strand of Mu Zu's divine will. At the critical moment, it was used to save Mubai's life. Buzz! The heavy sound of the sword judgment came from the void of the broken world. The 3 beams of light fell and scattered around Qin Hao. A terrifying sword will directly penetrated the illusory figure of the battle god, ignoring the power of the 9 palaces and crushing into his spiritual soul. Qin Hao felt his mind was in chaos. The sound of the sword turned into the face of a dignified old man that appeared in his consciousness. The old man's eyes were like torches. His divine might was boundless. His palm slapped down directly. Endless sword aura flew out and pierced Qin Hao's spiritual soul. Almost at this moment, Qin Hao felt an intense pain of his spiritual soul being riddled with holes. Kill him. Mu Bai knew that Qin Hao was suppressed by the great ancestor's sword will. He pointed at Qin Hao, who was in the phantom that seemed to be dispersing at any time. Mu Zhan no longer hesitated. The divine power of the heavenly wheel released an extreme black light. His murderous aura seemed to freeze the surrounding space. Countless black ice crystals floated down in his will of the way. His figure pierced through the thin shadow of the war god, and the black sword in his hand pierced toward Qin Hao's chest. Danger! Under the old man's dignified face and the sky full of swords, Qin Hao's consciousness was very clear. He knew everything that was happening outside. He also saw Mu Zhan's murderous sword getting closer and closer to his chest. That pure murderous sword will made people feel exceptionally cold. However, this danger did not come from Mu Zhan. In the haze, Qin Hao seemed to hear the mournful cries of this broken world. The complete great Tao in his body also felt the same. A majestic and boundless terrifying aura was sweeping over from the distant wilderness. It fiercely pressed down on this broken world. That feeling was as if a great strength god had swung a 10,000 gene hammer and smashed it on a child's head, leaving not even a single bone behind. The mournful child was this broken world. Boom! The terrifying energy affected his divine soul, and that power shattered the old man's sword intent. The old man's dignified face was also distorted by the impact and crazily collapsed. Qin Hao felt as if he had been drowned by a deep sea. His divine sense fell into complete silence, and the last thing he saw was a ray of mirror light penetrating his body. Rumble! In the outside world, the battle god's phantom was shattered. Qin Hao, who was overbearing just a moment ago, was now powerless. Mu Zhan's sword pierced through his chest. Just as he was about to use the power of law to cause more damage, Mu Zhan realized that something was wrong. A trace of panic flashed through his eyes. He hurriedly pulled back the divine slaughter sword in his hand. Bang! Qin Hao, who was in a coma, fell straight down from the sky, leaving behind an afterimage. He heavily smashed into the foot of the giant's mountain, shattering a mountain rock. You killed him! Mu Bai looked at Mu Zhan in shock. I didn't. Mu Zhan's hands were trembling. He was at a loss. It shouldn't be like this. With Li Chuji's strength, he should have been able to dodge that sword. Even if he was suppressed by Mu Zu's divine might and couldn't dodge it, he shouldn't have been unable to retaliate. Mu Zhan clearly felt that the moment his sword pierced Qin Hao's body, the other party didn't have a trace of divine power. This shouldn't have happened. But why was it like this? Phew! Mu Bai let out a heavy breath and coldly glanced below. Although he ordered Mu Zhan to kill Qin Hao in a moment of anger, since it happened, so be it. Young Master Mu, what should we do? Mu Zhan gradually calmed down. Once this matter was exposed, the Seamless Academy would definitely not let it go. Don't worry, no one knows how he died. Mu Bai glanced at the surrounding area. No one from the three realms was here, so who would know? This was the heavenly path broken world outside the sword world. The three divine lords couldn't sense it. So, Li Chuji deserved it. Let's go and take the thing on the mountain. It shouldn't be simple. Mu Bai said to Mu Zhan. Perhaps the secret of the broken world's destruction was on that thing. They should bring it back to God Lu. Mu Zhan nodded and dispersed the heavenly wheel. He put away the sword in his hand. Although killing Qin Hao didn't feel good, it was the only thing he could do now. How did it disappear? The two flew to the peak of the mountain and looked at the empty mountain pass. The shining thing was gone, and there wasn't even a trace of divine intent left in this place. Mu Bai and Mu Zhan looked at each other in surprise. It was as if they had seen a ghost. The treasure had disappeared. Rumble. Right at this moment, in the dusky void of the broken world, strands of calamity light were torn apart. The ruins below exploded with violent tremors. Mountains crumbled one after another. Terrifying cracks spread out crazily as if they were going to tear the entire continent apart. The Realm Lord's remnant power is disappearing. This place is going to be destroyed. Mu Bai said in shock. The realm force was disappearing. Without the heavenly path's will, everything under their feet would soon turn into dust. Mu Bai Jianchen. In the distance, a vast sword ray flew over and Jianchen's shout could be heard. As the realm force of the broken world dissipated, Mu Bai's signal was received by Jianchen. Without the suppression of the Realm Lord's remnant power, with Jianchen's cultivation, he was able to lock onto this place with just a thought. He could bring people over. Divine General Chen. Mu Bai was overjoyed. Then, he saw the other two lights chasing after Jianchen. His expression instantly sank. Chapter 2083. As far as the eye could see, the endless ruins began to collapse. Without the Realm Master's remnant will and the stability of the realm power, the once glorious continent would soon be annihilated. At this moment, the space above the giant mountain pass was so quiet that it made one's hair stand on end. The teams sent by the three great sword realms to explore had regrouped. Long Tian, Jianchen, and Severing Love were all covered in dust. It was obvious that they had encountered a lot of unforeseen events, but the team did not lose any members. Only the Seamless Academy was left. At this moment, Li Guangxing was hugging Qin Hao's corpse. The wound on his chest was bleeding profusely, dyeing half of Li Guangxing's robe. It was a shocking sight. Li Guangxing's eyes were completely red. Despite his calm personality, he gritted his teeth so hard that they made cracking noises. His gaze towards Mu Bai was filled with intense killing intent. Danqing, Wei Zhe, and the other disciples of the academy were the same. Many of them clenched their fists, and the divine light on their bodies fluctuated violently. It was as if they would pounce at any moment. Loi, on the other hand, was different from her usual temperament. She stood calmly in the academy's team. However, when Mu Zhan looked into her calm eyes, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Li Chuji was dead. How could he die? How could he die in a place like this? Even with the reality in front of her, Loi did not want to believe it. In her impression, Qin Hao was too strong. He was so strong that she could not see the bottom of it. In fact, she was not the only one. Li Guangxing, Danqing, Wei Zhe, and the others did not expect this to happen. Qin Hao broke the 9 waves of the sword waterfall and caused the sword waterfall to flow backward. He drew out a total of 81 swords from the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda and controlled them with ease. The Divine Master's sword was like a part of his body. That day, the Sword Pavilion's 9 echoes shocked the entire divine realm. From then on, the Academy elders looked at Qin Hao differently. They faintly had a respectful attitude, respect that came from the bottom of their hearts. He used 300 years of cultivation to condense 2 divine powers of Tianluan and perfectly merge his sword will with the great Tao of space. In the entire academy, other than the divine master of Avicii, no one could do it, not even Loi. How could such a monstrous genius die in the ruins of a destroyed city? Li Guangxing and the others were unwilling to believe it. That's what happened. The thing on the mountain is extraordinary. We didn't expect it to be so murderous. If it wasn't for this shield, I'm afraid Mu Zhan and I wouldn't have been able to escape death. Now that the shield is broken, it's my fault that I didn't help the Academy disciples in time. Mu Bai's face was filled with guilt as he spoke with pity. However, His words did not get the Academy's approval. Including Severing Love, after hearing his words, there was no change in their expressions, only coldness. Nonsense. We all know Junior Brother's ability. What kind of powerful divine object could kill him without him reacting? He has already completely mastered the will of space. Dan Qing roared angrily. If Qin Hao did not condense the divine power of space before coming, he might have been killed without being noticed. But it was different now. Any divine technique needed to go through the space layer. Even if Qin Hao's cultivation was weaker than the divine object of the broken world, he would not have died so powerlessly. Mubai was lying. Doyen, this person is not trustworthy. Li Guangxing's throat was a bit hoarse. He and Qin Hao were the same batch of Academy disciples, so they were naturally closer in private. Moreover, Qin Hao's personality was very easygoing. He had always been humble and polite in the Academy. Even though he was proud of himself, he never showed off in front of the other disciples. The older disciples of the Academy also liked Qin Hao very much. They often talked about the Tao of the Sword in private. Because of this, Dan Qing and the others were angry. I am the young master of the Mu clan under God Lu. Are you slandering me? Mubai said coldly to Li Guangxing. We will know if I am slandering you or not. Loi took a step forward. Frost's divine intent flowed around her body. The bone-chilling cold made the already tense atmosphere even more tense. Stop. Severing Love shouted and waved his hand at Loi. Divine General Chen, old man chose to believe in God Lu. Now that our Academy disciple has died and his divine intent is almost gone, we have to rush back immediately. I hope Wu Jin can save his life. As for the broken world, I will leave it to you and Prince Long Tian. Qin Hao was not from the Sword World, but he cultivated in the Seamless Academy and used the power of the Great Path World to condense the divine power of space. His sky wheel was imprinted with Divine Lord Wu Jin's will. Therefore, Wu Jin might be able to reverse the Divine Realm's heavenly path and find a trace of Qin Hao. However, the chances were slim. Qin Hao died under an unknown divine object and was annihilated by the laws. Even a divine lord would not be able to revive him. If you need anything, as long as the Academy asks, Rikujinji will do our best to help. Jianshan cupped his fists and said. Severing Love nodded and swept out a turbulent sword current from his sleeve. It swept up the Academy disciples and turned into a huge sword light that pierced through the sky and flew towards the realm of Wujin. Mubai's words could not be trusted. Severing Love could see this, but he could not directly fight with God Lu's people. He had to go back and ask Wujin for his opinion. Wujin was the true god of the Academy. A realm war was not something that could be fought at will. There were too many implications. Jianshan, Rikujinji has done a good thing. As Severing Love left with his people, Long Tian put his hands behind his back and sneered coldly. Senior Long Tian, what do you mean? Mubai asked righteously. Did he mean that he had harmed Li Chuji? Mubai, shut up. Jianshan's face suddenly darkened. Long Tian was not a human. He was the crown prince of Zhenlong Field, and was known as the strongest under the Dragon Lord. Even if the Mu clan's ancestor was here, he would not dare to talk to him like this. Haha, it's okay. Long Tian did not care at all. The younger generation of the Mu clan was no different from air in his eyes. His overbearing face glanced at the distant area of the broken world. Everywhere was crazily collapsing. He said, the realm power is scattered. This broken world will not last for long. It seems that there is no need to continue exploring. They did not find the source that pushed the broken world to the great path of sword. However, the broken world began to collapse on its own. The area where the three sword realms intersected was safe. This trip was considered to have completed their mission. Other than that, they found many useful divine objects in the broken world. Those things were left behind by luck after the destruction of the world. They were well preserved and considered to have gained something. Divine General Chun, if you want to continue exploring, you have to hurry up. Brother, let's go. Long Zhu said. A dragon roar came from Long Tian's body. Just as he was about to lead everyone away, his pupils suddenly shrank. In the depths of the broken world that was torn apart by the light of calamity, two extremely tyrannical divine path wills rolled in at an astonishing speed. Almost before Long Tian had the chance to react, numerous figures had already stood above them. Buzz. Vigorous divine path aura spread out, turning into energy waves that swept in all directions. In an instant it covered the boundless world of the broken world. Those collapsing mountains and the torn earth miraculously stopped. The whole world seemed to have come to a standstill. Who is it? Mubai raised his head. The moment he looked over, an extremely dazzling divine light shone down from the top of his head. The majesty of his will was difficult to resist. At this moment, the cultivators of the Dragon Clan and the people of the divine world below felt as if they were being stepped on by a mighty god. You guys destroyed this place? A voice was heard. The dazzling divine light gradually dispersed, revealing figures with extremely tyrannical auras. Among them, a young man was surrounded by many experts. He was as calm as the divine son of the primitive world. His temperament was peerless. May I know who you are? Jianchen asked. Just answer whatever he asks you. You don't need to know anything else. At this moment another voice was heard. His tone was gentle and extremely elegant. Looking in the direction of the voice, everyone found that it was a young man in a jade robe. He was so clean that there seemed to be no flaw in his appearance. His temperament was also peerless, just like the old saying, "Young master is peerless." Only then did Long Tian and Jianchen realize that the young man who had questioned them before was not from the same group as this young man in jade robe. He was also surrounded by experts and had a strong aura. Obviously, he belonged to a different force. I, Long Tian, have lived for so long and no one has ever dared to talk to me like that. Long Tian floated up to the same height as the young man. 9 dragon chi surrounded him, and a terrifying dragon roar was heard in the sky, showing the temperament of the crown prince of the Zhenlong realm. He didn't know who the young man was, but it wasn't difficult to tell that he was definitely from a super force in the primitive world. Even so, Long Tian wasn't afraid. After all, he was the son of the Divine Master. A member of the dragon race. Beside the cold young man, a divine general clad in dazzling divine armor stepped out. When he looked at Long Tian, his lips slowly curled into a smile. Suddenly, the divine general threw a punch. Turbulent sound waves were mixed with astonishing light particles. It was like a beam of light piercing through the sky. A boundless majestic god appeared on the divine general's body. His punch was extremely terrifying. Roar. Long Tian swallowed the universe and directly let out a true dragon roar. He used the dragon race's most powerful divine technique. Suddenly, the sky was filled with twisted dragon shadows. Countless dragon shadows flew forward and collided with the divine general's fist light. The dragon shadows were shattered one after another. The dragon race's most powerful divine technique couldn't withstand the divine might of the young man. The punch destroyed the dragon shadows and suppressed the sound wave. It landed in front of Long Tian. Then, the fist light retracted and the divine might disappeared. Divine Master. Long Tian's hair fluttered in front of him. His face was covered in cold sweat. He looked at the divine general who attacked and found that the young man was much younger than him. But at this moment, Long Tian understood that the young man was the lord of a realm. He was an expert on the same level as his father. His cultivation was unfathomable. Little guy, for the sake of Dragon King Thousand Saints, I won't care about your rudeness. The huge divine shadow disappeared and the divine general slowly retracted his fist. He stood behind the young man quietly. But at this moment, everyone from the dragon race and Jianshan were soaked in cold sweat. The space was dead silent. Do you understand now? After that, he turned into a beam of divine light and left. Go! The young divine master, who was full of fighting spirit, was stunned. The white-haired old man sneered at the young divine lord when he saw Junemo leave. Then, he turned into a beam of light and chased after Junemo. All of a sudden, beams of majestic divine Tao light pierced through the sky and disappeared into the vast, untainted land. Boring. The young divine master looked bored. Divine Master Funwei, if you feel wronged following Junemo, you can join me. Don't worry, they won't dare to pursue the matter. The jade-robed young man invited him with a smile. These words made the young divine master's face tense up, and there was a hint of fear on his face. Then, he regained his composure and said to the jade-robed young man, "Thank you for your appreciation, Your Highness. His Royal Highness has treated me well, so please forgive me for not agreeing." With that, Divine Master Funwei left. You don't know how to appreciate kindness. An expert next to Tamanaji spoke up, as if he didn't take the young Divine Master seriously at all. Your Highness, do we need to make a trip to the Seamless Academy? Someone asked. Tamanaji smiled and didn't answer. Instead, he turned into a beam of pure white light and flew into the sky. Seeing this, the people accompanying them were rather confused. That thing was very important to Tamanaji and Junemo. Why did the two of them leave without saying anything? Could it be that there was some powerful god in the Seamless Academy that the two princes were afraid of? But in the entire primitive world, Tamanaji and Junemo already stood at the very top. As the beams of majestic divine light left, the pressure that enveloped the broken world disappeared, and the shattered ruins continued to disintegrate faster and faster. Long Tian and Jianshan stood where they were for a very long time, not daring to move. Their hearts were pounding. What had just happened? Two God-King factions had welcomed here, and a noble divine prince had arrived. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.